All right, guys, we mean to get to this. Apparently, Sneako has a conversation with Dr. K. Dr. K is a pretty smart guy. I think he's like a therapist or something. He's pretty interesting. I appreciate his content. Sneako is the opposite. My understanding, this is supposed to be a therapy session for Sneako. My understanding is Sneako tries to clown on Dr. K, and he ends up getting clowned on himself. So let's see what we got here. We're probably going to slowly increase the speed as it goes on.
Hey, Dr. K.
Sneako, you perma-banned me on...
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Can you just count to 10 for me real quick?
1, 2, 3, 4,
good test. Intelligence test.
5, 6, 7.
Perfect.
Can you
count
to 420 for me?
2, 3, 4.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. That's good. Sounds good.
Thank God Dr. K's volume is so much lower. Good job, Sneako.
How are you?
Good, dude. How are you?
I'm like,
Hey, what's going on, brother?
yeah, I'm live right now on Rumble.
Okay, cool.
Are you streaming?
Nope.
Okay.
I think you're banned on all the platforms that I stream on.
Yeah, that does happen. That does happen. So you're a therapist?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm a psychiatrist.
You're a psychiatrist. Okay. I don't believe in therapy, and I think it's a scam, and I don't think it's necessary. And
Okay, I think it's a little ironic for the guy scamming his audience base to not believe in scams with his like MLM marketing schemes. But yeah, obviously therapy works. Therapy will work if you're open to it. I know that sounds so stupid, but it really is. That's pretty much it. Therapy will work, but it's only if you're open to the therapy working. You have to be in particular, like, you have to be honest with yourself. You can't just say what you want the therapist to, what you think the therapist wants to hear. Therapy generally is about the therapist identifying a problem in you and then getting you to realize what that problem is. Not everybody needs therapy. Sneako probably could use it. I mean, he's a terminally online kid, but yeah, it can work. Certainly can. And there's different types of therapy also, but okay.
I don't think that even if there is anything wrong with my brain, that this is going to be helpful whatsoever. I believe that men should just get
Sir
over it.
Capt Nemo just gifted 1 membership.
Hey, thanks for the membership, brother. I appreciate it.
For it. I think a better use of your time instead of talking about your feelings is working hard. And
yeah, I mean that can be a way that you deal with your stuff, of course. But it can be productive to talk about your feelings. I mean, therapy's only, like, it depends on how serious it is. But therapy is usually only, like, let's say once a week for an hour. It's kind of worth it to be able to get some kind of an outlet if you don't have a different emotional outlet. It's good to have an emotional outlet. It's good to work hard, too. But, it's good to have an emotional outlet.
building something, that's a better use of your time than anything that, even if this was productive, my time would have been better spent making some money and getting stronger and getting better. Cool. But I want to be convinced that it's useful because a lot of people are talking about therapy, and people have accused me of being mentally ill quite a bit. They called me mentally ill since I was a child. I get that a lot from the internet saying Sneako needs to go to therapy. So maybe you can.
I mean, Sneako is just completely captivated by like online cloud chasing and nonsense. So
change that perception.
Okay, so let me just make a couple things clear. So I am a psychiatrist, but I'm not your psychiatrist.
Okay.
Is that clear? So I'm not doing therapy with you, right? You're not my patient. Okay. I'm not going to be diagnosing you or treating you for anything.
Okay.
Very professional. Okay, fair enough. I mean, that's a very professional response. It's a very solid boundary to set.
We're having a conversation, and if you, I didn't know what we were talking about, but
we can talk about anything. I'm just like prefacing with that.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So, and I mean, is that what you want to talk about?
No, I want to talk about whatever. I want to talk whatever you want to talk about. Can I cry?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I don't know how this works. What are we supposed to do?
That's a great question. So.
Okay.
Well,
it's like he's just such a weird like little kid the way he talks about stuff, because obviously he's trying to put on some bizarre performance.
I mean, so was there something in particular that you were thinking about when we last connected? So I don't know if we reached out to you or you reached out to us or what exactly happened, but what was there something in particular that you had in mind?
Okay, what do you specialize in? I've seen you talk to some of my friends. You talked to Aiden for a couple hours and you were able to dissect and figure some stuff out. And I don't know. I think it's gonna be an interesting conversation. I don't really know.
I completely agree. I think this is gonna be a very interesting conversation.
Okay.
Let's hope.
I think it's. I would. So let me tell you. So you asked.
Let's hope this is the content for the day. Okay. This better be. Oh, he's our little comedian. This better be interesting. All right.
So how does this work? So I think there are a couple things to consider.
Okay.
We already talked about. It's not my place to do a diagnostic assessment of you and say that you are or aren't mentally ill. That being said,
I've diagnosed Sneako with a TOBS disorder, terminally online behavior syndrome. All right, they're gonna have that in the DSM-5 soon. I'm telling you, dude. I'm telling you. I'm coining it.
Sometimes I talk to people, and people will have questions about particular things. Okay. Sometimes those are related to mental health, and I'm happy to answer questions about particular things or try to help people understand parts of themselves, which a lot of times people think is the same as therapy. That's not the same as therapy. It's something that understanding yourself is a part of therapy, but not all paths of self-understanding are therapy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Fair enough. Sure.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I really enjoyed hearing your take on how therapy is not real and how people should just tough it out.
It's real,
like
but it's a giant waste of time. Like, I don't think there's some people that have trauma. Some people have trauma and PTSD. I think like veterans or something like that, or if you have really like death, and I can see how it can be effective. But I think most people that go to therapy just like to hear themselves yap in real time. I think that they like their own problems. They like feeling like a main character.
I think that most people don't do that because it's expensive and unproductive. Like, I don't think anybody necessarily likes therapy, or at least most people. I mean, they might like it, but I don't think most people are like, yeah, I just want to go yap to somebody and waste like $250 if my insurance doesn't cover it. I'm not sold on that concept there, but you know what? Maybe I'm wrong, dude. Maybe I'm wrong.
And it's just a way to vent, and it's like a pussy way of dealing with your problems. It's an easy way out. I think it's actually, I think people give themselves a lot of credit for going to therapy. Like, it's something difficult. So I think it's really easy to sit on a couch and talk.
I've never heard anybody say therapy is really difficult. Who is he talking about?
I think what's better.
I mean, it can be difficult to get to like some kind of what do you want to call it? A result. It can be difficult, I guess. I don't know if it's like super okay, whatever.
Is moving forward and trying to shove it down and keep going, because even if you don't shove it down, you're still gonna think about it. I think people have this idea that you need to process your feelings on a couch next to a guy. You could process your feelings like while you work. A lot of times I'm thinking about the things that I'm
sure. If you have more complicated feelings, then sometimes you can't. That's it. Okay, cool. I mean, that's great.
Dealing with while I'm working, and that could be therapeutic as well. Or prayer. Sure, I think prayer is much more therapeutic.
Okay, so when you say therapy,
I think that different people could use different things, and if prayer works for you, that's great. But for people who have more serious issues, obviously a licensed mental health counselor or therapist would be more effective.
Therapeutic, yeah, that's great, dude. So I'm excited about this conversation. So let me just ask you a couple of things. So when you say that you think therapy is a waste of time,
yeah.
Why do you think that?
Because you're basically just saying you know the answer already. I think
well, that's the thing, you don't. right? Isn't that the whole thing? You don't necessarily know the answer, or maybe there's some insight, or maybe you do know the answer and you just aren't motivated to change, or there's 100 different things that you can engage with. Or maybe you know the answer, but you don't know how to change, right? There's like a bunch of different things that you could use. When I was a kid, I went to therapy. I had like a lot of anger problems, and it was helpful to go there and not just learn that I had anger problems, or not even to learn where it came from, although it was a majority from, not having a father, but just learning how to cope with it in a more healthy, productive way. Sometimes it's not like this crazy thing all the time.
When you walk into therapy, you already know the answer. Like instinctually, you know what you're supposed to do, and you kind of just want to talk about it to make yourself feel better.
Okay.
So where do you get the idea that therapy is about? Where do you get your impression of what therapy is?
From everybody that talks about concept, like, I'm from New York, and you hear all these people in Manhattan. Everybody, all the libs, they talk about, like, I was just talking to my therapist.
Right, you don't go outside and talk to any libs in New York. He could live anywhere, and he would hear the same thing, because he's not going outside talking to people. If you go into New York, most people, you're not going to hear libs say this. You might see them on the street, but him living in New York, it's meant to, I know this is like a silly little sticking point, but him saying, hey, I live in New York, it's supposed to be like some kind of like, I know better because I live in New York, but he doesn't talk to anybody outside of his friend circle. It's not like he's going out and like hearing a bunch of libs go, yeah, I was in therapy the other day. It's like, okay, you could live anywhere. This is the more, I guess, the online narrative about therapy, I guess. I don't really hear it. Like, who is he hearing this from? Whatever.
I just told my therapist.
Maybe TikTok annoying kids that talk about therapy too much. I don't know. I don't see it. He has a different For You page.
Oh, my therapist, I'm calling the therapist. I need to talk to my therapist about this.
Nemo super chatted $5.
Captain Nemo.
Much love. I watch your vids since always working when you live. Be safe, Papa.
Thanks, brother. I love you. I appreciate that.
Have relationship problems, and like, we need to go talk about it to my therapist for 5 hours and have a deep therapy.
Nobody's talking to their therapist for 5 hours at a time. Shut up.
Like, it's been way more normalized, and I think they prescribe a lot of problems so that you always come back. It's the same reason why.
I mean, I understand the conspiracy theory of like the therapist needs you to come back to be effective, but for the most part, it could be very difficult for people to come to a long-term understanding of their feelings and shit. So
the pharmaceutical companies do not want you to be healthy so that you continue to buy their medicine. If I go to a therapist, your job is to take my money from my mental health problems.
Guys, the gym also wants you to always go there. Maybe that's a conspiracy theory. The gym is a conspiracy. They don't want you to stop going. They won't tell you this. They won't tell you this. But they want you to keep going to the gym.
Why would you want me to get better? You don't. You want me to keep coming back and paying you. So you're going to
Exactly. That's why the gym's a ripoff.
tell me, oh, come back next week and we'll unpack this and we'll unpack that. I don't need to unpack all this from childhood. I'm an adult. I'm 25. I'm going to shove it down and keep going.
That's debatable. He's an adult. He's fucking 17.
Why do I want to unpack this stuff?
Okay. What has happened when you've tried to unpack it?
Unpack what? Childhood?
So you said that like I don't want to unpack it. I want to shove it down.
Yeah,
right?
shove it down.
Like what is so? Obviously, you'd want to do that for a reason.
Yeah. What's your relationship with even trying to unpack your stuff?
Right. So you've had some experience that makes you prefer.
Well, I'm speaking generally. Like people will talk about how they go into therapy and unpack all this stuff. Okay. It's better. Like I don't understand why people are 35 reliving all that. Well, I get it, but I just think that's a stupid decision.
I mean, unironically, there's an interesting conversation to have there, I think. Because listen, you have two general pathways. You can either go to therapy or you can just not, right? And if you have a problem that therapy could be beneficial for, in the long run, that might help. But it also, in the short term, might fuck you up, right? So let's say you have a mental health problem and like you could really use therapy and you know that and you go to a therapist. And you start to unpack. Usually what happens is if you have a lot of deep-seated, like, repressed trauma, the therapist gets in your head and you pull all of that out. And all of a sudden, in the short term, you're just fucking devastated. You're like, oh my God, I forgot my uncle molested me when I was 7. You know, you learn all this other shit. Luckily, I never had that problem. I was an ugly kid. But so you could have this short-term, like, absolute destructive path almost that can yield really good results in the long run. But then, like, I think, yeah, maybe if you're aware of that, you say, fuck it. So I get it. I still think it's good overall to go to therapy. I'm just saying, like, there's something to think. There's something there. There's something there.
Well, what do you get when you say you get it? Why do you think all these stupid people are in therapy?
What do you mean get it?
Like, well, you said you get it. So I'm curious, what do you get? Why do you think all these people are in therapy if it's such a colossal waste of time and essentially a monetary leech?
Because
he's going to push like a conspiracy.
It's easier to talk about things rather than find an action that's going to... It's easier to talk your way out of a problem than work your way out of it. Working is hard.
Well, talking your way out of a problem would be considered a form of working your way out of the problem. Sometimes people just need to talk about the problem. Okay.
Hard. Pushing forward and doing things that are difficult, that's harder. Right? Like, I consider the gym therapeutic. I consider sparring. I spar quite a bit. I consider that therapeutic.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think those things are therapeutic too.
Good,
and
yeah.
and I mean, I'll be the first to say that.
Why not do both? Go to the gym and then also go to therapy once a week. Like, you could do it. You don't have to. I'm just saying.
I don't think therapy is therapeutic for everyone. I think that the concerns that you have are actually like quite valid in terms of, I think sometimes therapy goes on way longer than it needs to.
Okay, sure.
I don't really think that, in my experience, most therapists that I know are not interested in keeping people there for monetary reasons. And the very simple reason for that is there's no shortage of patients. So if you stop paying me, there's like literally a line out the door of like hundreds of people. Like the average waiting list for a therapist is like 3 or 4 months.
Interesting. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, you have to go through a lot of schooling for that. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Sure.
Wait, you don't get it? When you see like a blue hair transgender walk in, you don't like rub your hands together like, oh. No, like when you see like a dude that looks like a girl with kitten ears, like.
My thing is like, how many trans people do you think exist where this is like something happening all the time? Like, when you see a blue hair fucking dirty liberal, you don't rub your hand. I mean, not for nothing, but it's not trans. There aren't that many trans people. Like, they're like a 1% of 1% of the population. Of like, well, I'm talking about people with like gender dysphoria that would need therapy in this robot in the way that he's talking about it. So it's like, what are you talking about? Like, he's delusional. Most people that are going there are like actual like grown adults that are just trying to, well, I mean, trans people are grown adults, but like just people that are just trying to get through their shit. Usually maybe it's recommended to them and they have insurance. So like, yeah, let's try it.
What makes me go like this is listening to you talk about therapy.
Bro, Dr. K just roasted this. He's been fucking roasting Sneako from the start.
Because I think that there's like a lot of stuff to talk about that excites me.
Okay.
It's not the blue-haired transgenders, man. It's
Okay.
dudes who focus on shoving it down in action and don't care to engage with their internal environment, which is a little bit of a judgment because I don't know that that's actually the case with you. But I mean, this excites me.
Okay.
Okay.
But anyway, what do you think about what I said about, with their waiting lists, 50% of therapists don't take new patients, like we're full up. Like, we don't need your particular money because there's like tons of people that are waiting to give us their money.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Fair, but maybe the whole system works together. The pharmaceutical companies, the therapists, they all work on the fact that people's mental health. People are always talking about mental health. They all profit off of that. In a world where people fix their problems with prayer and with gym, that whole industry would never exist at all. So even though
Well, the problem is that like the gym is great. It's a great, I think you should try to work on your mind, body, and spirit. It's a good thing for everybody to try to do. But I also think that, and it's not bad to go to church or anything, but the church is not a substitute for legitimate mental health counseling. We've seen it's not really effective for more complex things going on in your brain. It can be good, but it's not a substitute. So to say like, oh, you can go to the gym, that's great, but it's not going to replace myriad of other, look at like the Duggar family. They had a huge problem, and they were trying to just pray it away, and their kid ended up becoming a pedophile. I think a lot of it had to do with the way that they raised their kids, where they had like a ton of kids, and some of their kids were like adult figures to their other kids, and then I think one of them was like 12. Wasn't that like John Duggar or whatever, like the super pedophile? And he started sexually exploring with his siblings, which is unfortunately, it's natural for kids to start sexually exploring, but not with like 4-year-olds at 14. And so instead of going to a mental health counselor going, here's problems, you need to stop having any of your kids basically be parents to the other kids. You need to educate your kid in sexual health, a comprehensive sexual health education, consent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You need to remove them from this type of environment where they're able to do this. Josh Duggar, right? They were just like, pray it away and it'll go away, and it never did. And now the kid is like an actual, like legitimate, like horribly offending pedophile, disgusting human being. That probably could have been avoided, but praying it away didn't work. I'm not saying prayer is not good. I'm saying that there's going to be alternative methods, and if you're not religious, prayer is not going to work for you at all. So it's not even like it's available for everybody.
you might not need more patients, it's all based on the fact that everybody's diagnosing themselves in real time.
What?
Well, so let me ask you this. So when you said fix their problems with prayer, how does that work?
Well, I just came back from Mecca, and you can see people, you call sujood when you put your head to the floor. And you see people sometimes like sobbing. Like when you go to the masjid on Friday, I'm gonna go tomorrow 1 p.m. for Jummah. You see people like crying, and
that's cool.
It's because they're definitely thinking of things that they're asking God for certain things to be fixed. And I consider that therapeutic. That same type of tear that they crying that they might do in therapy, instead they're connecting with God. I think all those problems, like opening up, about unpacking stuff like that, you should unpack it with God. I see them and the way that they are, and I felt it too when I was in Mecca, for example, and praying next to the Kaaba. I really felt everything that was going on in my head and everything. It's not like I have to shut it down. I know everything that's there, but it becomes present when you're in prayer. You feel it. You're thinking about it. You're reminded of everybody you love. You're reminded of your past. You're reminded of your flaws. You're reminded of what you want to do better on. You're reminded of your fears and everything. And then
Well, the problem though is that, like, as nice as it is to have a relationship with God, you're not getting any legitimate feedback from God. So when you're like, well, you're reminded of your flaws, but if you don't know what your actual flaws are, you're not being reminded of your flaws. You're just reminded of what flaws you think you have. You're not actually assessing yourself. You're praying, and it's not bad to pray, but you're not getting feedback that would be able to actually, help you with any flaw that you may not actually understand. So, but I guess based on his argument, he thinks everybody already knows their own problems. So, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, so whatever.
you look to God for strength and for guidance and to keep you on the straight path.
Okay, so let me just make sure I heard you. So when you pray, so it sounds like you feel a lot of positive emotions.
And negative too. Like I wouldn't say positive too, but like everything.
Yeah, I wasn't done. So you said you feel a lot of love, you feel a lot of fear, right? You think about people that you love. You also think about actions that you want to take and places that you want to go. So you have goals that you think of.
Right.
And then what? Help me understand this part about God. Where does God enter the picture?
I would prefer. I can understand why therapy is helpful for a lot of people, but I think it's better to go and talk that out, talk about your trauma and your past to God rather than to a man.
Okay, so I'm not trying to debate you. Okay, so I'm not trying to like catch you or something. I'm confused because now you're saying you think that therapy can be helpful for other people, but prayer is superior.
Yes.
So there's some benefit to therapy because it sounds like a lot of I'm assuming that you think a lot of the mechanisms are saying you talk about your positive emotions, you talk about your negative emotions, you talk about your goals. You can do that with a person, but it's better to do it with God.
Yes.
What makes it better with God?
Because I don't believe in confessing your deepest.
I like these questions. They're so much better than anything I would come up with. because that's what it is. Like that's the beautiful thing about therapy is, like I had said earlier, when you talk to a therapist, usually they'll be able to figure out what you kind of is wrong with you and then guide you to a certain area, and usually do that through questions. You ask a question that would signal a particular response and be like, oh, or it makes you think critically about what's going on. So it's like, it's so much better to ask like a very interesting question for this person, to Sneako, and then actually tell him what's going on.
There's darkest secrets and
yeah, he's basically getting a level of a therapy session.
You're gonna, yes.
And it's nothing's ever instant. So if this is something that ended up taking, and Sneako has like a revelation as time goes on, it would take a while. So it's not like instantaneously. It's like, oh my God, you're right, Dr. K. You know. So
what makes it better with God?
Because I don't believe in confessing your deepest, darkest secrets and sins. I think that you're gonna embellish the truth. I went to therapy.
Don't you do that though at confession? You do that as part of your therapy. No, I mean, like, I guess he's a different religion, so maybe they don't do that. I don't know, but yeah, isn't that part of it? Do they not do that in the Muslim religion?
Therapy one time. I was 19 and I was talking to this woman. I was basically like head over heels about this girl. I was in college and like it was just a lot of things. I was just like going through like so I decided.
And then she cucked me. Sorry.
All right, like everybody's doing this therapy thing, I'll pay her. And then she had giant tits. She was like really gorgeous, and so I ended up embellishing the story. And instead of like actually being honest, I was just trying to like, you know, I was like spitting game on her like I was on a date.
Okay, so that's probably, so then you're probably not mature, or at least at that point weren't mature enough to talk to that therapist, and you needed to see a different therapist that was more aligned with what you needed, which is clearly like an older guy, probably. Well, maybe I don't know if that would change. I don't know if he's gay or not, but repressed. But what do you? Wow, okay, interesting.
And I realized that I'm like I can't fully be honest with the person because the only person you can really be honest with is God. To a person, you're always going to be there's going to be a level of entertainment. There's going to be a level of...
Right, but again, even if you believe in God, you're not getting feedback. You're getting feelings, and you know those are really just your feelings, probably. So for you to be like, well, you're gonna get better feedback from God. It's like, okay, if that is God, but if it's not, then you're not really getting that feedback, are you? You're just kind of talking to yourself, and you're like, this feels right, and maybe your feelings are not correct. So
lying, you're going to try to make sure that they're engaged. You're going to try. Your ego is going to be involved. When I'm talking to God, I don't have an ego. There's nothing. There's nothing that I need to hide. It's just because God is all knowing. God's the best of planners, so He's going to know. And I even noticed that a lot when I was praying in Mecca. I felt all the ego and the little blockades that I had in my head, and the barriers that you have when you talk to a person. They're absent when I talk to God.
So again, it sounds like you need to be a little bit more mature and able to open up to a therapist, which is why a lot of times the first several therapy sessions, even for maybe a month or so, is just learning how to be open with your therapist and learning how to trust your therapist. The process is different with everybody. And if you're somebody that can take a while to get to a point where you feel comfortable trusting somebody, well, you know, that might be the way that you have to operate. And there's nothing wrong with that, though. But you might need time to just kind of build that trust. You might need a little bit of trust building time. So,
okay, can I think for a second?
Yeah.
How's this conversation so far, by the way?
Interesting.
Okay. So let me just make sure I understood. So you tried therapy once, and because your therapist had big tits, it sounds like you activated a different mode of relating to that person.
Yeah.
So you started like hitting on her.
I remember like telling the story, and I was like, even my gestures, I was like, all right, so boom, so I was at the spot, and then we really did it. And like I'm thinking of like, you know, I got this girl, and I'm doing my thing, and I was just like,
I'm sure her pussy was soaked, bro. She was probably fucking soaked. Boom, so I was at that spot.
Talking like I was talking to, like I was trying to come off cool.
Yeah. So would you say that what you did for that hour with that person was therapy?
Bad therapy.
Right, but who's the reason therapy was bad? Just who would be? Oh, wait, I'm hitting the wrong buttons. Oh, I fucked up really bad. Who would be the reason that it was bad?
Made it bad.
Actually, think about it. Like I did learn some things, and I didn't need to go back anymore. So, yeah. But I think the reason it was effective was because I realized that I don't need therapy. Like it just helped me realize that this is unnecessary. So I did get to talk things out. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Hold on.
Okay.
I'm honestly, I'm not trying to like debate you or like I have no interest in proving you wrong. Honestly, I have no interest in that. Okay. It's just I'm just like kind of curious because here you are saying, okay, I tried therapy, but it sounds like it's kind of like saying like, okay, swimming is a waste of time, and then you ask me like, why do you think it's a waste of time? Well, I went to the beach and like I never really got in the water. I just hung out on the sand, and like swimming is a waste of time, right? So you went there, you did something, but I mean, you're telling me that you treated this person, you didn't do therapy, you started flexing for her.
Yeah.
Right? That's not therapy.
Okay.
Now, and I think that that's fair, right? Because you're also saying that, okay, like the problem with therapy is that when you go, you can't be completely vulnerable or honest with another human being.
Yeah.
Because, and so some kind of script, and I would
Well, I
get,
mean, maybe that's Sneako's problem is he doesn't know how to be vulnerable or honest because last time he was. Well, I mean, here's the thing: if you look at Sneako from his perspective rather than like the right way to look at him, Sneako is somebody who's been consistently emotionally vulnerable and constantly getting dunked on. You look at him when he was emotionally vulnerable with his girlfriend and they tried to be in an open relationship, and then that didn't seem to mend their relationship. Or he was emotionally vulnerable with the internet, telling people about that relationship, and they clowned on him. It seems like Sneako is consistently opening, or historically consistently opening himself up emotionally, and just kind of getting dumpstered for it. So, like, I get where it comes from. I understand where the feeling comes from, but like, he probably does have an issue with being emotionally vulnerable because of that. Can I get 2 on here? Oh, I can't.
if I asked you, like, okay, let's say that there wasn't a female therapist with big tits. Let's say the therapist was like, I don't know, a middle-aged dude. You would still be activating some kind of script with them.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so what I'm hearing you say is that the cool thing with God is that there's no scripts.
Right.
So I'm kind of curious about something. So, like, one of the advantages of therapy, right, is that there's another human being there. Now, that's a disadvantage because now ego enters the picture. Maybe you're trying to impress them. Maybe you don't want to be vulnerable. Like, totally fine. But there's also an advantage, which is that there's a person there, right? So they're able to listen. They're able to respond. They're able to interact. They're able to observe. And maybe I'm making an assumption here, so I'm going to ask about this. Do you think that God does those things?
Observes and listens
and talks back?
Yeah, I do.
How does God talk back to him?
And in what way?
If you want something, you're looking for some sort of guidance, you can ask God and God will respond.
How? Yeah.
Not in the way that a human does, but there is a response. And
what?
It's kind of instinctual. And
how do you differentiate this instinctual interpretation of God's response versus, you know what I mean? Like, how do you know? How do you know that it's God responding and not something else or someone else or just your intuition? And that might be flawed.
Like he'll tell you what you should be doing. Because I think deep down you always do know the answer.
God, should I jack off? Oh, fuck, he's responding. He's telling me, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, maybe he's not.
So when you say, so you're saying that God will tell you, and then you're saying deep down you know the answer. So are we saying?
Well, what happens if? Okay, let's say there's like this problem, and Sneako's like praying to God, like, God, what should I do about, this? Should I eat this apple? And somebody else is praying for Sneako, and they're both like asking the same question. Should Sneako eat this apple? And Sneako comes to the conclusion that he should eat it, and then this other guy comes to the conclusion that he shouldn't eat it. Like, how do you, you know what I mean? How do you parse through that information?
That deep down the voice that's talking to you is God? Is that you or is that God? Or am I not understanding the...
Well, I mean, we're all God's creation, so there's a sort of connection. I think deep down you all know because we're all born pure, and then we start to become corrupted with sin. We start to become corrupted by what's around us, and then that's what creates the blockade. So, like, behind all the ego, behind the mess and the programming, you know what the truth is. But you can ask God when you drop it, and you're able to hear his guidance.
Okay, what makes it easier or harder to hear his guidance? I
think it's actually, in a lot of ways, it's harder. It's not easy to be vulnerable like that. It's not easy to get to that point. It took me a long time, but I do know it's possible after consistently praying.
Okay, well, that's
right.
Nice,
so what makes it easier or harder to hear God's voice? Because you said sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's harder. I'd agree.
Well, you have to full submission to God, and there's a lot of sometimes people aren't able to do that because they're sinning, or sometimes.
But I mean, doesn't this guy still do like dating bullshit and fucking around with different girls? Is that really very? Is that very of God's ways? I can't imagine he's like an Orthodox Muslim.
People aren't able to do that because they're too angry, they're too emotional. It depends on what state you are in life. But if you can get to that point, then you're able to communicate with God.
Cool.
Okay. So I'm hearing that, I'm with you that if you're able to get to that point, it's great, right? So you hear some kind of voice or some kind of knowing or instinct or connect with the divinity within you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, maybe there is a God telling him, but I think that it's very possible he's mistaken God for intuition. Yeah, I mean... even if God is speaking to you, how do you know you're translating him correctly? How do you know that? That's why we have a Bible, or that's why we have a religious text to tell us, like, hey, this is what God thinks. So it's really not a matter of like, what is God saying? It's usually you'll learn something, and then intuition will be based off of what you learned, and then you'll operate in that capacity. And that's if you think your religious text is a source of objective morality. We know that at least I don't know too much about the Islamic religion, but we know that in the Jewish religion and in the Christian religion that the Bible is not a source of objective morality. Because when people are you press somebody that's religious, and you'll say like, well, the Bible condones slavery, and they'll say, well, that's what it condoned slavery in the past, right? Or what they'll say is, well, this is what they'll actually say. They'll say God will give people teachings based on what he thinks that society can handle at that given time. And so back then, when they did say that slavery was okay, they put in certain rules and parameters for slavery that was better for the slaves than they were before that. It's like, okay, so what that means is God's not actually giving you his objective morality. He's giving you a subjectively better morality, even if it's not perfect. And so we know the Bible isn't actually a source of objective morality or God's word directly. And it's quite possible that there's still more to learn from God's word. And so, I don't know, is that the same with the religion of Islam, or how does that work?
Is it cool if I call it that?
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm also hearing that it's not entirely clear what the mechanism or methodology to connect with God is. So there's certain things that get in the way, maybe anger, maybe sin. But even if I'm not angry or I'm not sinning, does that guarantee I will hear God's voice?
No.
Or right? So then what else goes into it?
Fear. It could be like sometimes, for example, well, I'll give you Islam, for example, because I'm a Muslim. And a lot of people connect with God in different ways. I don't think any of that is inherently wrong, but for example, when you pray in Islam, you're supposed to make wudu before, which is cleansing yourself. You're supposed to wash your arms, wash your feet. You're supposed to wash your face, your ears, and everything. You're supposed to be in a clean state. Even when you pray in Mecca, you're supposed to be wearing a white garment that's clean. Like there's a way to purify yourself and make sure you have true intentions. Even when you're washing yourself before prayer, you're supposed to make sure, like, the whole point is to make clear intentions that I'm going to pray, or else your prayer isn't accepted. Like even when you get on your knees, put your head to the floor, you can't just go through the motions and expect to be able to connect with God. You have to have clear intentions to do that. So I think there's a lot of things. If you're emotional or if you don't have faith, sometimes people just don't have faith. Like there's a lot of things that can block your faith.
Okay.
Does he have that? I'm wondering if he does that ritual, because he said that some people pray differently. Maybe he's referring to somebody else. Curious though.
And let's say I'm having trouble, right? Let's say I don't really have faith, or I'm afraid, or I'm angry. Actually, forget about that. I realized I was slipping into a debating kind of mode, so I'll just say what I'm going to say.
Okay.
So here's where I think there's an advantage to therapy. So I completely agree with everything that you said. Okay. I think the challenge, though, is that what you're sort of talking about is like difficulties within you. So like, let's just take faith, for example. So not having faith is like really tricky, right? Because faith is not something that is born of logic. It's born of faith. It's the belief in something. And if you really look at it, technically, you can't have faith. You can't have faith if you have knowledge, because knowledge is when you know something. Faith is when you believe something, right? You have faith in something. Agreed there? I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm laying out how my understanding is.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. If you have to have a faith in something, that means that you know that there's no objective proof of that thing, and so you have faith that it is real. Yeah, sure. It doesn't mean it's not real. You just can't prove it. That's why it's called a faith.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So I think the big advantage of therapy is that you've got like another human being. So if you have other problems, right? So like if you have, let's say, fear or anger or a lack of faith, that there's actually like another human being there to help you with those barriers.
Right. But humans are inherently flawed. And
which makes sense, though, because even in religious structures, and again, I don't know if Islam does this or not, but they'll have some kind of a faith therapist. They're usually not actually officially, licensed in any real capacity, but you'll have somebody who is some kind of a therapist in some capacity, and you talk to them, a guide. I forget what the word is. It's nothing like fancy. I just can't remember it. But you'll have like a religious counselor. That's the word, guys. Holy fuck, I'm so smart. So yeah.
Never going to be perfect. So
absolutely.
A therapist's advice is always going to be inferior to God, because God's all knowing and God is perfect and God's more intelligent than us. I don't think that there's any human that's better than me or smarter or that knows.
Well, then the question is then why do we have like different priests? I'm sure Islam has different forms of a priest, whatever they call it. Maybe they call it a priest. I have no fucking idea. But why would we need that if everybody had this? The question here is like, does Sneako actually have the correct relationship with his God to be able to have the right answers to the questions that he's asking internally or asking to God? But that's why we have priests, right? People who are supposed to be better communicators with God or Allah than you. So wouldn't you need to parse this information with more than just yourself? I don't think that even within religion, you can't trust yourself. That's why we have priests, people who to some extent interprets God's words much more closely.
Knows anything that I don't know, because we're all created equal. So, I mean, it's good to kind of voice those things.
Except
and that's why that therapy session that I had with that woman with the giant breasts was effective. Incredible. Because I realized something. She didn't tell me anything. It was just me talking that made me realize that this is useless and I don't need this. I think when you talk to...
Maybe because she was a woman and you just don't respect women. I'm seeing this woman with big fat tits. There's something about her that makes me not respect what she has to say. I wonder what that is. What the fuck is that, guys? There's something intuitively God's just like, don't listen to this bitch with fat titties. There's something in my fucking brain. It's something in my brain thinking, fuck this fat tittied bitch, you know?
So,
hold on a second. So I'm not. I don't. Once again, I don't disagree with any of your premises. I just don't. I come to a different conclusion. So you kind of said, I'm with you that human beings are flawed, right? And so, but just because a human being is flawed doesn't mean that a human being can't help another human being.
True. Yeah, I'm not saying it's completely useless. I'm just saying that prayer's better.
Okay. Cool beans. Cowbunga. Dude.
Okay.
And I think people like the echo chamber and have a certain level of narcissism. I think if you keep going back to therapy like that long without any solution, you just kind of like hearing yourself talk.
When you say that long without any kind of solution, like what's...
Well, I mean, you're just you're creating a very specific fantasy, or excuse me, not fantasy. A very specific scenario where somebody's just going to therapy for a very long time, not getting any use out of it. And they're just like, yeah, let's just keep doing this. I suppose if that's happening, yeah, you probably don't want to do that no more. I agree.
What's your understanding of like the course and outcomes around therapy?
There's a lot of people that I'm sure you know these people, so they have their therapist on speed dial. And they talk about the therapist like they're friends.
I don't think that that's normal. I don't think that I don't think it's bad to do that necessarily if you need it, but I don't think that's typical. I never had my therapist on speed dial. I never talked to them as friends. I went to therapy for a very long time. Yeah, I don't think that that's... I mean, I'm sure that happens. I don't think that that's a typical relationship because you're usually billed for those hours. So I ain't trying to fucking spend more.
You know,
I don't think that's the majority of people. I think that is a tiny fraction of people. I would guess less than 5%. So I know that, for example, like part of our training as therapists is that we set very clear boundaries. We're not your friend. So you're not supposed...
Yeah. And I'm sure there are therapists that are bad, but like Dr. K set an incredibly hard boundary of this is not a therapy session right at the beginning in a very firm, authoritative way that was still polite, but like it wasn't even really very emotional. It wasn't even like, sorry, but he's just like, I'm not your therapist. Like, which if it's you need to respect, I do. It's an incredible thing. But
supposed to be texting us all the time. So when a patient texts or calls me at like 8 p.m., I'll answer because they don't usually do that. And then I'll ask them, hey, can this wait until our appointment? Or do you really need to talk to me now? Or do you need to go to the emergency room? Or like, what's going on? So I don't think that because a lot of what I'm really confused about is that I think a lot of your understanding of therapy is based on, I'm not quite sure what you've heard, I guess.
I guess my understanding is like it's a lot of liberals who prioritize.
What's your understanding of therapy? Well, there's these liberals. There's these goddamn liberals. It's like, okay, the fuck do they have to do with you? I think there's something interestingly self-destructive about looking at another group that could be associated with a thing and going, that thing must be terrible, right? It's imagine like your favorite thing in the entire world was milk. But then you found out your fucking mortal enemy loved milk. It's like, well, I'm not going to do that thing because my fucking enemy drinks milk. Now, milk is a beautiful thing, by the way. It just seems like a toxic relationship to just kind of jump into the opposite direction of a thing that could be very beneficial to you because people you don't like use it. Because that's what I'm kind of hearing. His entire idea of therapy just seems to be the LOL liberal.
Feelings over facts. The people that yeah, the people that usually go to therapy, just I don't think that they're...
let's be real. Sneako doesn't really have a factual foundation for anything that he feels or thinks. Mostly because when I still go back to that conversation he had with Destiny about wearing masks and shit over COVID, and he's like, oh, I loved this weird hypocrisy where when it came to that conversation, Destiny's like, here's a ton of resources that shows that the masks are real, that they work, they're effective, COVID's real, that was dangerous, we needed the shutdowns. And then he goes, well, I don't trust any of that information because it's just on Google. But then Nick Fuentes confronts him and says, yeah, Black and Hispanic people are like biologically, inferior to white people. And Sneako goes, oh, I don't know if I believe that, but show me some facts about that. And it's like, oh, okay, so what the fuck? So it's so interesting that you use the facts, don't care about your feelings. But then also there's an irony to saying that and then saying that you're religious, because religious, again, and not to knock or to put down religion, but religion is there's zero factual foundation in religion. That doesn't mean that it's wrong. I'm just saying it's interesting that you would go facts don't care about your feelings, and then you're part of a completely faith-based group. Faith-based group. So.
Or based in reality. I think that they like trivializing their lives, and they're just not that interesting, and they want to make it more interesting by making up problems and unpacking everything.
Where do you get that? Right. So like for example, you said that they're like interested in feelings instead of facts. So like, where do you get that impression? Like, I'm confused by that.
For example,
because you're drawing a lot of conclusive statements, and I'm curious.
They have something called like gender affirming care. I remember having this in school where we had like social workers.
No, you don't. There's no way that you had gender affirming care in school. No, I just don't believe that. He's 25 years old. There was no gender affirming care in his school. You're telling me that 7 years ago he had gender affirming care? No, we didn't even have. Hold on a second. Okay, so gay marriage was legalized in 2015. 7 years ago was 2016. I'm telling you right now, there was no gender affirming care 1 year after we had implemented gay marriage being legal. A year. You're telling me a year after? No. And those things are connected because that's kind of how that's how we work or we operate from a social acceptability perspective. He didn't have gay marriage, he's 25. He hasn't been in school for 7 years. That's when he would have graduated. So we're talking about this even earlier. So there's no gender affirming care in Sneako's school. He's just lying. He's just saying weird lies. It's very bizarre. That does not exist. I don't even know if that exists today in schools. I don't even know if that exists today in schools. Adopting policies that respect all students' gender identities, such as using a name different from their legal name pronouns that reflect. Okay, so it's just using names and pronouns. Okay.
Therapists that were designed there, and there were rooms for safe places where there was like a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist, and they were just talking. They were just
none of these things are real. He's
talking about their feelings, and then
none of these things.
It was always they had like rainbow stickers on the front. And all these people that ended up becoming transgender or becoming gender fluid, they were always constantly in therapy. Or like, I went to school with a bunch of depressed kids.
Well, it's in the DSM-5, so there's like a level of mental health assistance required. It doesn't make it bad or wrong. I'm just saying, like, if that was the case, it wouldn't even be bizarre. Like, it would just be like, oh, okay, all right.
Kids who thought they were depressed. All these kids were on SSRIs. They were all said they were anxious. They were constantly popping pills. And they all had the same political ideology. It was sort of like centered around the fact that weakness is okay. They didn't see strength as a virtue. They saw weakness as something to lean into.
None of these things are things he saw in school, just to be clear. He's just making things up. I don't even know. This is a very bizarre, very interesting rant. He's yapping at this point. He just likes to hear himself yap, just like I guess the students that he criticizes.
How do you know that what they saw? That I'm confused. Like, how do you know what they see?
I mean, by talking to them, I guess I don't, but talking to them all the time. See, like,
all the time?
The people that were constantly going to therapy in my school were the gender fluid people. The people that didn't believe in it and the people that were like on a different political idea, like they were the ones playing sports.
You just wouldn't know any of this because they wouldn't be telling you, and you didn't have these robust classes in your school. You're just making up silly little fibs. What the fuck is happening? It's very bizarre. Sneako's he's a very fucking weird person. He's very weird. He's very just like very emotional, very conditioned by his surroundings. Okay.
Sports, working out constantly, and who are like trying to build something.
Okay. So I'm sort of seeing like there's that just the way that you're viewing things is that there's a lot of like correlations.
Yeah.
So going to therapy is correlated with weakness.
With
is correlated
weakness,
with a political ideology. Is correlated with not exercising. Is correlated with not doing things.
Yep. Inaction.
Let me just think about why are we having this conversation?
I mean, the next plan of attack would be like, Sneako, you're lying. But I don't think Dr. K wants to do that.
Because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my way of thinking is incorrect. I think it's pretty polarizing. When I talk about this, it upsets a lot of people. So maybe my worldview was wrong and maybe yours is right. And maybe therapy is necessary. Maybe I need it.
Oh, okay.
What do you think?
I don't.
Is he, I mean, just genuine question. Is he actually there because he thinks this, or is he like trying to do a bait? Is he trying to bait Dr. K into something? I wonder. I mean, so far, I don't think the Sneako's really necessarily said anything that would indicate he's trying to just bait him, but
I believe the reason I believe what I believe is because I think I'm right.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's what's so interesting. So here's my experience of this conversation. So you say things in ways that are very polemic. So like polar. So you say things in a way that invites me to argue polar and try to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
Like just the statements that you make. And I can see why people are like inflamed by that. And if I don't try really hard to catch myself, then I will start arguing with you.
Right.
Interesting.
Why are you smiling right now?
Because you're right. Because you're completely right.
Okay. Well, maybe I'm just completely wrong. Maybe I'm just so used to the way that Sneako just acts obnoxious that I'm like, yeah, he's not really doing anything to be too polarizing or argumentative. But I guess that's what he's doing. I'm just used to it or something. Or maybe I'm just a fucking idiot and can't read anything. Who knows?
That's just my way. People tell me that quite a bit. I have like an argumentative style of speaking.
Have you asked God about that? Does he think that that's appropriate for you to constantly try to argue with people? What does your God say about you constantly trying to be argumentative?
That's not the question that I asked. I asked, why are you smiling?
I'm smiling because you're right.
So
Because
what is the correlation with me being right and you smiling?
that in 20 minutes you picked up on what my friends and family have been saying for years.
Okay. And when I pick up on something that your friends and family have been saying for years, so that's just like a fact, right? Like I picked up on it.
Yes.
But you have a reaction to that, which is that you're smiling.
Right.
So that reaction comes with an emotion.
Yes.
That's what the reaction is.
Yeah,
What's the emotion?
that's a good question. Yeah, why do you get satisfaction out of being argumentative? Interesting.
The emotion. I think I get like a dopamine hit from. I like.
Dopamine's not an emotion.
What's up?
Dopamine's not an emotion. What's the emotion?
Laughter.
Is that an
Laughter's
emotion?
I'm not
I think laughter's an act. Would an emotion be like happiness? Laughter. Okay.
trying to make it sound stupid here, but laughter's not an action. So let's think about it. What's the emotion?
Joy.
Laughter's the expression. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So like, how do you
Brittany B
understand that?
became
Like,
a member.
Thank you so much, Brittany B, for the small guide.
Here I am noticing something about you, and your reaction is joy.
Okay. I like connecting with people.
Yeah. Right. Doesn't that feel good?
Yeah.
Is this weakness? Is what we're doing weakness?
No. But
Is it
also,
strength?
it's a strength. No, it's just a conversation. Like this is similar.
Interesting. Okay, that's very smart. He's trying. Dr. K is saying like, look, we're connecting, and you don't think that this is weakness. So why do you think it's weakness when you connect with a therapist? I think that that's the route he's going down, to just show different, like fundamentally different types of. Very smart guy. Very smart guy. Okay, he definitely is very intelligent. That's smart. Oh shit.
It's the most. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So it's neither weakness or strength. It's
Yeah.
just we're connecting.
Yeah.
Feels good to connect.
Yeah.
Let's kiss.
Yeah.
Does it make us weak to connect?
No.
Fucking.
Does it make us strong to connect?
Neither. Well, yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Whoa. How? What's so?
Because you're stronger in group.
Does it make us strong to connect? Yeah. How? I love this. This is beautiful. I'd be fucking. That would be me on a goddamn wall though. If somebody's asking me these questions like this. To be honest with you, that's kind of how it is when I talk to my wife sometimes. Sometimes she'll fucking do this shit to me. She bother the fuck out of me. I do love her though.
So if I connect with somebody and then we go forward, there's two of us
we can
instead of
kiss.
one.
So there's value to connection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Education connection.
So I think that like we're not doing therapy, but I think that we just experienced what I would call one of the benefits of therapy, which is to be seen. So I know you're putting on an act, and yet it feels good to like see through it, right? Like I kind of saw through it.
Yeah, true. You did.
And that feels good. And this is the other thing is I'm not judging you for it. I'm not saying like, hey bro, you're an asshole for doing this. Why do you do this? I don't get angry with you. I imagine a lot of people get angry with you.
Yeah, that's true.
Probably should. Yeah.
And that must be tough for you.
Or maybe we'll talk about.
Let me rephrase.
I'll let you go.
It used to be tough for you, but now you're better at it. Now you're stronger. Now you know how to pray and you have faith in God. So it's no longer a problem that people are angry with you, right?
No.
You
No,
upset
meaning
some-
what?
Also, the kind of reason I kind of like. I like making people
I
react.
want to hear him answer that. We're going down like a therapy pipeline. Well, he is pretty much reading him at this point. Hey, thank you so much, Brittany, for the upgraded to large gut. I really appreciate that. Here you go. Wow.
I like even if it's laughter, I have the same sort of reaction to when people get upset. I like being able to say stuff and then people go, huh? Or laugh. Or like I like having an effect on people.
Yeah.
So like when I say like a racial slur and then people, huh? Like that's really fun for me.
How do you understand?
Why? Okay.
So first of all, is that
Same, dude. I love saying racial slurs. Holy fuck, it's my favorite. Yeah, you can ask me a question. Go ahead.
common for many people?
I don't think it's as common as. No, I don't think it's that common.
Yeah, I'd agree. Maybe everyone likes it a little bit.
I
but
like
not
it
like
more
you.
than most people. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you
think so.
understand that?
I don't know. It's just always been that way. It's always been that way.
Are you interested in understanding it?
Yes.
Okay, so what? What's that expression?
Because now it's like I'm thinking you're gonna like dig into my past to figure out like why that is.
I don't even know.
I wonder if that's the goal. Was that the goal from? Oh fuck! I didn't want to build that. Was that the goal from Sneako the whole time, to get Dr. K to dig into his past, but without asking? Like, was that his whole thing of like, I don't feel comfortable asking, but I want him to dig into it? Like when you ask somebody if there's something wrong and they're like, no, and but they really want you to like push on that. I wonder if that's what it is. Interesting. Yeah. How are you able to focus on playing games at the same time you react to YouTube videos? Sometimes 1.5 speed, not miss a beat. I think I miss a beat sometimes on it. Sometimes when I'm playing a game, I will miss a beat. It depends on the game. It depends on how like brain rot it is that I'm doing. Like I during the conversation I watched with Morby and Timmy 2 Cents or whatever, they were talking and there were parts that I missed. Same thing with the conversation with Adam 22 and the the stalker guy. That's what he is known to be known as. Because I was playing Warcraft, but I was looking at something that I didn't know about the game. So like I missed a couple of things because I was actually engaging mentally a little too much. But usually it's just because I'm playing like games I've been playing for a while, and I'm just kind of like brain rot, know what I'm doing, so it makes it easier to listen. Sometimes it makes it even easier to listen when I'm doing it because I'm not bored. Sometimes reacting to videos can be boring. It doesn't mean I don't like doing it. I enjoy giving my perspective. But like when you sit down and do something for, this is a 2-hour long video, so it'll take me at least 2 hours because I have it on 50% increase speed. Sometimes, like if I don't have something to distract me, I'm not fully engaged. I think that's how people consume content in general. Like you probably are watching me while you're doing something else. Either the dishes or the laundry, or, you know, maybe you're even on TikTok. My wife does that all the time. Or maybe you're jacking off because I'm so hot and I have such a nice voice. But it helps you focus 100%. It's almost like people have different, they do other auxiliary things to do or whatever, secondary things. I don't know why I use auxiliary. But yeah, I can't even pet my cat and watch TV without having to consistently rewind videos, so it's fascinating. Yeah, I just think it's different. I think maybe it may have a little bit of my, I don't know if it's my ADHD, but you know, I think people just have different interactions with different things. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just different ways people interact with stuff. But yeah.
The answer.
What's the answer?
Hey, what's up, Brittany Simon? I don't even play games and I still miss stuff. Damn, Brittany, you got to get better. You got to get better. I'm just kidding.
I'm not gonna tell you yet.
Huh?
Oh, I missed a question. Hold on.
What's that expression?
Because now it's like I'm thinking you're gonna like dig into my past to figure out like why that is.
I already know the answer. It's just,
What's the answer?
I'm not gonna tell you yet.
Huh?
I'm not. We don't need to dig into your past. We don't need to. We can do that if you want to. But we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna figure it out together, right? Because connected, ape strong together.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
that
Stronger
work?
together. Yes.
Fucking
Okay.
strong.
Okay, so let's think through it. Right. So and see, even the way that I'm talking to you is changing. So what have you noticed that I'm changing?
Yeah, we have more defense mechanisms, and now they're dropping.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah. So you know what I'm doing to drop your defense mechanisms?
You're saying things to make me feel welcomed and like you're understanding.
Yeah. And
Stuff.
what am I saying to you to make you feel welcome?
It's
Am I
everything.
saying, oh my God, Sneako, you're so great.
No,
I
no,
love
no.
you. Like, I'm not, right?
No.
And what I'm actually doing is I know the answer, you don't, and I'm not going to tell you, nya, 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 nya.
Right.
Okay.
And somehow, like, you feel welcome with that. Like, let's play, like, we're playing a game. You feel it?
Well, because everybody likes talking about themselves, and that you told me that you're going to talk more
I
about me
guess.
in the future, and that's like everyone's favorite topic.
Is it your favorite topic?
No.
No. Yeah, I don't think it's everyone's favorite
Maybe
topic.
I feel like Nico talking about himself might be one of his favorite topics. I don't know if that's true. I feel like maybe he likes talking about himself. I mean, I like talking about myself too sometimes, but yeah, I feel like that's something that he likes. I feel like that's not even a hot take, is it?
I think it's
I don't
narcissistic,
know. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No, but I think it's like, I think human beings like to understand themselves. I don't think that's unusual.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
so let me ask you. So when you try to get a rise out of people, right? It can be negative. It can be positive.
Yes.
Affirmative.
Okay. So let me ask you. So how does it
Thank you for all the compliments in the chat, guys. I appreciate you. Wow.
feel to not? So when you get a rise from someone, I'm going to say that means that I'm relating to you. I'm noticing you. I'm acknowledging
What the fuck
you.
did I just
Is
do?
that
Oh.
fair?
Yeah.
So if you don't get a rise out of people, how do you feel?
Interesting.
Inadequate.
Yeah.
And
right?
getting a rise doesn't.
So is he trying to say that his? I mean, what do you define in getting a rise out of somebody as? Like I look at getting a rise out of somebody as trying to provoke them. You know, because I like to get a rise out of people sometimes too. Like I fuck with, you know, especially like in my family and stuff. I like to be a bit of a chop buster, you know, they'd say in my family. And so that's what I consider getting a rise out of somebody, is being a little bit of a chop buster. And so like Sneako is a chop buster, but it's, if you like getting, if you like busting chops and that you get a rise out of it, like, does that mean that you just like to fuck with people and almost make them upset? I don't know if that's good. Is it?
It just has to mean
Yeah,
anger.
son, you just went. Yeah, I know, but inadequate. Yeah, I'm
Inadequate, yeah,
surprised you
yeah,
got there that fast.
Like you remember, I remember standing in circles at school and stuff like that, and like there's like a group of people talking, and then you say a joke and then nobody reacts, or like you just say something and like that, like, am I here? Like, did anybody just hear what I said? Like, am I invisible? And then someone.
What pisses me off so much is that I went to Universal somewhat recently, and we went on this horrible ride. It was terrible. It was the Fast and the Furious ride. It was just a terrible experience. And then afterwards, the ride broke down, and so when we're all waiting, sitting there, I made a joke. I said, "Oh, this is the best part of the ride." I didn't get any reaction. Then, like 10 seconds later, my mother-in-law makes the same fucking joke, and everybody starts laughing. I got so angry, I started violently beating her. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. But I got so fucking pissed. You take credit for my joke. God damn it. You know?
Repeats the joke louder, and then they all get a laugh. What the? Yeah, that shit sucks.
Yeah, right. So you feel invisible unless you get noticed. And so, like,
you sure?
right? Your words. I mean, I use the word notice, but you use the word invisible.
Yeah.
So So now let's like kind of think about it, right? So now like there's a guy who goes out of his way because fucking A, we're gonna notice you, Sneako. Right? You're gonna make sure
Sneako's
of that.
an attention seeker. Is that what we're saying?
Right? And you kind of come out charging, and we'll see if you flip back into that mode later.
Okay.
But we'll see what your tolerance of vulnerability is.
Yes.
Maybe. But I think you're okay with this because I think you like to be seen. I think you're actually more okay with being vulnerable than you give yourself credit for.
Right, but I think the biggest issue, and what I noticed in Sneako was that...
Would you consider that some kind of vulnerability? How are we defining vulnerability at this point? I guess he likes to be seen. I feel like vulnerability, what is it? Inequality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. Oh, okay. I guess. I just would consider vulnerability like letting people into like your actual feelings, not necessarily being seen. But maybe I'm just a stinky little boy.
Yes, that's true, but doing it for the right reasons. Like, I think it's okay to say a racial slur and if someone gets upset because my intentions are...
Why are you bringing up the racial slur thing? It's okay to say racial slurs because you think your intentions are pure. I just disagree. I mean, I feel like there are some things that you could say that are going to offend people regardless of your intention. But okay, who cares?
Sure. It's just like, it's funny to me and it's funny to people who get it. But also the fact that if I...
say slurs for yourself, to your friends. You don't need to go out and say slurs to other people. And I don't know why he's bringing up racial slurs. Any slur is not good to say, unless you're driving. It's different.
Who have eyes that I'm putting out the right message and that I'm influencing in the right way. That it's not just like clamoring symbols like a loud monkey or getting, there's some people that just started into a giant clown show that I'm doing something right. And that every time I speak that it's, there is something positive coming out of it.
Sure. So it sounds like is this the first time you went to Mecca?
Yes, just came back.
And it sounds like it was quite a powerful experience for you.
It was the most powerful. I haven't even fully talked about it yet. Yeah.
I guess his Mecca is like a Disney for me. Very powerful. Very powerful experience that I got out of Disney, dude. Very incredibly powerful experience. I loved it. It was fun. I'm gonna go back with my wife again, probably for her 30th birthday. She turns 29 2nd of January, and then we're gonna go next year. I gotta plan. So I gotta make a lot of money, guys. All right, you gotta start. We gotta get the subscriber count from 31,000 to 50,000 by the end of next year. Okay. That might be doable. I might be able to do it. It's in the first year I went from 12,000 because this is my secondary channel. So I went from 12,000 to 31,000 in this past year as focusing on this is my main channel. So maybe I might be able to pull it off. I'd be able to pull that bad boy off.
It was like one of the most. It was the best experience of my life.
Yeah, so like now I can see that you're more centered, right? And now you're sort of saying like, okay, like if my intentions are pure and like all this other stuff, which is cool, but like you were
just to be, sorry, but he had made this point about the intentions are pure, so that's why he's comfortable using slurs. I obviously disagree with the usage of slurs, but I will say that there's a similar relationship that I've been having with my jokes lately. When I used to make jokes back in the day, and that was like something that really popped me up, was I used to make jokes that were edgy, but I was always so well-intentioned and I was never hateful. And I got to a point where I started becoming hateful because of like backlash that I got. And I'm not going to get into it specifically, but and then I stopped making jokes on like TikTok, and then I started focusing on other things like commentary more than anything else. But like now I feel comfortable with all the jokes I've been making. I know some of them are edgy, but I feel like I know I'm not trying to be hateful. Like I like it when people laugh at my jokes. So, I kind of resonate with that to an extent, not the slur part so much, but so I kind of get that, I guess. Because I have a similar thing, but
you were clowning long before that, right? You were getting rises out of people long before you went to Mecca and understood everything that you've understood now.
Yeah, since I was like 4 years old, I used to like tell knock jock jokes like this. I would, always. I was always like making stand-up comedy type jokes.
Super chatted $4.99.
What up, Sussy
Hey,
Bach?
Papa Guy, love your videos. First time in the stream. Is this a new thing you're doing?
Yeah. The thing I started doing was reactions. Yeah, it's my newest thing, man. Thank you so much. You guys are fucking crazy. I love you.
Since I was like 3.
Okay. Yeah. Like, Can I ask you about what growing up was like for you? That's like, oh my god, like.
Growing up was good. Growing up was, I grew up in around Connecticut and New York, New Haven. A pretty mixed, diverse, 2-parent household. Really good parents.
This guy grew up in Connecticut? I thought he grew up in New York. I know he said Connecticut and New York, but he's been pushing this idea he's from New York for such a long time that it's like, oh, he's from New York, but like the fact that he's like Connecticut/New York makes me feel like maybe he's not as much of a New Yorker as he claims to be. I wonder why. I know that he was bullied a lot as a kid for being too feminine, And that's not like me making a joke out of it or anything. I remember watching his conversation. I've been watching a lot of his stuff, like, you know, over the past year or so. And he was talking to young Don, and he talked about how he was frustrated with like the black community because he felt like they would bully him for being too feminine, because the Asians are looked at as more feminine. That's like apparently an Asian stereotype. So I know that's a factor in his life as well.
And feel pretty. Yeah, siblings, older sister, younger brother.
And what will you say you feel pretty?
I'm very grateful that I had really good parents, and I still do. And
what made your parents really good?
They sacrificed a lot in order to raise us properly, and they put 100%.
Didn't they tell him that he's not allowed to come to like fucking dinner last year because he was associating with Kanye West? I mean, that's a good parent, you know. You got to set that firm boundary. But Kanye was fucking crazy. Still is. Hey, thank you so much for the 12-month skit widget. Hey there, new member here. Okay, finally catching alive. That was one of the that's one of the things I got to work on. I always read people's stuff before I actually comprehend it. That's just so funny. Like as I'm reading it, you're catching me because I'm not fucking actually like knowing what you're saying. It's kind of funny to me. But.
Into parenting, and I think that's pretty rare. I don't. My parents are still together, and like it's very rare that I meet people that still have parents that are together.
That's cool.
And when you say they sacrificed a lot, can you share a little bit about that? Do you feel comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they chose to, you know, they didn't go out and party ever. You know, they don't really have that many friends. They didn't really have like that much of a social life or a life outside of raising their children. Like that was their number one priority. Like they weren't selfish whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my mom was the same way, man. You know, my father left her 6 months or 5 months pregnant, and you know, she pretty much devoted everything to me. She never even had a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I don't know, maybe she's a fucking lesbian. If you look at some of the Disney pictures that we had, so it was myself, my mom, my mother-in-law, my wife. We all went. Like the two of them look like a fucking lesbian couple, and it's funny because my mother's very masculine as a woman, so I'm very much like my mother. And you know, my mother-in-law is more feminine, and my wife's more like my mother-in-law. Oh, the two of them might actually make a decent couple. I don't know. They might make a decent couple. I just don't want to hear those moans. You know, they'll be like, oh, weird. You know.
And what was school like for you?
School
you were the
was.
class clown?
Was that?
You were the class clown?
Yeah. Later on, I wasn't.
People would make fun of me and laugh at me, so I wanted to be funny for them, so they would laugh with me. Oh, beautiful.
Funny earlier, but then I did get funny, and then I was a class clown. Like I had ups and downs. Like I tried to be, I was like 4th, 5th grade. I like tried to be the class clown more than I was. It was cringe. But then like I developed a good flow.
Yeah. And what was like? What were your friends like? You know, things like that.
That was friend group, and we used to make like really fucked up jokes. Like my best friends when I was younger, a Jewish guy and a black guy, and I was more Asian when I was younger, so they would always call me like say that my ancestors died building the railroads, and I would make Holocaust jokes, and then I'd make slave jokes, and then it was just brutal, like just trashing each other all day long, and
that's somewhat typical for young men, I think.
Trying to make each other cry and laugh.
There's something weird about young men, man, where they will be so bigoted to each other, and that's just like a bonding experience. That's so fucking interesting.
And do you have a sense of what about that kind of humor resonated with you?
I think it was bonding over the fact that you can say fucked up things and it doesn't have to come from a bad place, because the teachers would always try to censor and say you can't say this, you can't say that.
Blasito98 super chatted $4.99.
Yeah.
Hey Papa, first time Cardi stream. Would be really cool if your wife was a behavioral specialist or if you were big on TikTok.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. My life would be very different right now if that were the case. It's fucking crazy, brother.
Deep down, you know, oh, well, my intentions are pure, because I say something doesn't mean I mean it. You know, it doesn't have to dictate what my belief system is.
And so,
I mean, here's the thing, because I understand that young boys make a lot of edgy jokes.
And say, you can't say this, you can't say that, don't do this, don't do that. But deep down, you know, oh, well, my intentions are pure, because I say something doesn't mean I mean it.
This is the problem, is that, like, you don't really know that kind of as a kid. Your intentions might be kind of pure, but, you know, there is something positive in a society that is empathetic to itself. I remember I watched this really interesting thing about what makes a species intelligent. It was very interesting. And they're like, oh, what do you think it is? A bigger brain? It's like, no. It's actually behavioral habits. It's actually empathetic behavioral habits. Because what happens is, let's say you have a group of any animal or thing, and there's 1,000 of them, and one of them learns how to do something. If you have a group that is empathetic, or they bond in some capacity, I'm using empathy as, you know, friendly. That was it, actually, what it was, friendliness, and I think empathy goes with friendliness. There's a higher likeliness to spread that new learned behavior to other people or other, you know, people in that group, regardless of not necessarily people, but other, you know, individuals in that group, because you're friendlier. Whereas unfriendly people have a lower chance of being able to communicate that and to actually be able to take that communication or that new teaching from something else. And so there's something very positive about friendliness to spread different ideas or new things that we learn. And so it's a good thing to teach people friendliness and empathy. And that's part of, again, I like edgy jokes, but that's why it's good to not use those in public, to be friendlier and more empathetic to people in public without wanting to exclude those people from super edgy. And again, I do make some edgy jokes, but I try to be well-intentioned. I understand what he's saying, but, in a school environment, a little bit different than on a stream environment. It's just something to think about, how interesting it is that friendliness can be a massive driving force in the intelligence of human beings, as well as your individual kid. It's very important to teach friendliness and empathy to your kids, and to know like the right time to do specific things, right? So I get it on a stream being a little edgier. I still think that there's a limit to the edginess that you should be pushing out. Would be different from school, because you do need to some extent, we'll call it code switch. You're a little different with your mom, your dad, your parents together, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your partner, people at school, people at work, people, you want to be a little bit different. You want to be, when I go out, I don't just start cracking jokes when I'm standing in the line at 7-Eleven, so it's time and a place.
It doesn't have to dictate what my belief system is.
And so have you been judged a lot for what you say?
Yeah, I got canceled off everything.
Oh, canceled.
And how do you understand that?
Well, let's be clear. You were simulating sexual acts with another creator. You were sexually harassing another creator. That's the big reason you were banned, and you deserve that. There has to be a level of cordialness. And if this was an actual job, you would have been fired, horrifically fired. You can't sexually harass other people on YouTube and expect to not get some kind of a punishment. So, plus, COVID conspiracy misinformation isn't exactly helpful.
I don't understand what you mean.
Like, what's that like for you to be judged for what you say?
I think it's a big responsibility because, obviously it's a bigger platform than just being like a class clown. A lot of people listen. I think one of the biggest shifts in my perspective was I was at a baseball game with Lil Pump, and it was in between the innings or something. We're walking to the hot dog stand, and then like these 11-year-olds come up to me, and they start like, they get really excited. They're like three or four, like they must have been 5th, 6th grade, and they go, "Fuck the women, fuck the women." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, no, like fuck
to like kill gay people. Yeah, it was pretty fucked up. Hopefully that was a life-changing experience for you.
genders. I'm like, no, fuck the gay people. I'm like, no, we love everyone. Just like, they're all excited. I'm like, is this what they get from my...
Yeah, no shit. Those are all the things that you say. Of course they're going to get that out of what you're saying. Oh, maybe that was the first step in a waking up experience for him. Hopefully.
I think it was equally like good and bad because they were joking. They were trying to be fun. They literally like reminded me exactly of how I was at 10, 11 years old. And it looks back at this on camera because people are like, this is what he's making them believe. Like, this is not what they believe.
No, it is. I mean, I understand maybe there are really edgy jokes, but that's kind of how it starts. I mean, it's dehumanizing language. They're little kids. It's not a really good thing. And young men are fucking assholes. They really are. I was a young man before. Young men struggle with empathy, I think, more than young women do. So, you know, I get it. Maybe they're not horrible people that need to be canceled forever, but you need to be more careful about it. And also, the parents need to beat those kids. If that was my kid saying, kill gays, I'd beat the fuck out of my... I don't care. You know, it's like, that's not appropriate behavior.
It's just something that adolescent boys all kind of go through, and I think it's good that they found a vessel within my videos to find a similar sense of humor. So actually, at first I was a little shook, and then it made me really happy. I think about those guys a lot and hope they're doing well. But
yeah, well, I think about kids a lot too, dude. You know, it's fucking great. I'm just kidding.
It's reassuring that, well, not reassuring, but it's like it gives you a little responsibility. Like, okay, like everything I say and do, like I should have something positive there because I'm influencing the youth. You know, whether or not a lot of people like to admit it or how much they try to cancel or silence or censor, like there's, you know, what I say is influential.
Well, they know that. That's why people are against you, because you're very influential. Yeah, everybody agrees with that. Yeah,
and in what way would you say you're influencing them?
I think I'm helping them embrace their boyhood in a generation where it's really suppressed, where men are becoming more effeminate, where we're told...
Yeah, that's not a real problem. Listen, here's the thing. The issue with young men in society isn't that they're becoming more feminine. The issue with young men in society is that I think most young men like to be very hyperactive and get their energy out, and we do not currently have a society that encourages that. You know, having a classroom where you're expected to sit down quietly and just pay attention to school for 7 hours a day is not something young men are very good at. Not getting a lot of energy out physically is not something that young men are not very good at. So that's the bigger issue. Fuck the feminine shit. Literally, no. We need to focus more on trying to create a better atmosphere for young men to get their energy out. Young men have too much energy and angst. A lot of, like, you know, I'm not saying that there aren't issues with women, but that's a bigger issue. Stop talking about like, oh, there's some fucking femboys. Who cares? The bigger issue is young men need to be able to have a better outlets for their aggression, get out. Additionally, another issue is with the internet, people not going out. Young men need to be more social and go out, and there's no, nowadays you just sit on the computer and everything comes to you. It makes it difficult for you to date and connect and get fucking pussy, which is something that's usually important for young men as well, at a certain age, of course. Or you could just say social interaction or dating interaction. But this whole feminization, this focus on it being the problem of like gay people, is just so ignorant and toxic when young men need a much different and better outlet than what he's talking about. So I think that the better focus and focusing on obsessively about LGBTQ people is focus on like, hey, how can we get young men outside, doing more things productively, going out and doing more habits in a very online environment, or hobbies in a very online environment, so that they can talk to other women and they can, learn how to fail at talking to women so that they can get better at it. Those are much, much more important.
To cry more and talk about our feelings more, where gender ideology is pushed, where inherently like no 12-year-old boy believes in that. They don't believe in any of that. They think it's garbage, think it's stupid, and they don't want to make racist jokes, and they just want to
okay, well, I mean, okay, but just because somebody believes something doesn't mean it's right. But I don't think that they're teaching gender ideology in this robust way where it's the only class. Usually it's just like, oh, call this person by their name or pronoun they want. It's really not that big of a deal. I guarantee you that young men don't give a fuck about that. Like, that's not something that's like, oh man, I really, this is it. It's not having the profound impact on them. It's the things that they're not getting that are a bigger problem.
Be unapologetic and be themselves. And we're trying to mold boys into something that they're not, and it's making a lot of people unhappy. And I don't think a lot of people see what's going on.
Well, okay.
When you say it's making a lot of, when we're molding boys into what they're not, right? So this is not, that's the side that's winning right now, which is not your side, right?
Right. The godless side.
And when the godless side is succeeding, what happens? when we get boys to talk about their feelings or men to talk about their feelings,
then the woman controls the relationship. Then you become deeply unhappy. You become weaker. It shows in your body, the way you speak. You become more of a snake. You just become less of a man, and you're not leading like the way you don't lead anymore.
It's interesting when a woman has more control over I mean, like, my wife doesn't control our relationship, but she certainly has like a very equal say to what I have to say. I think that there's a weakness in dating somebody who doesn't give any say to anything, and if that's the traditional dynamic of men and women, that's weakness in and of itself. So, but okay.
You're not leading the charge.
Talking about your feelings it means that you become submissive.
Yeah, because you're submitting to a person instead of to God. So, like, you opening up in that vulnerable way, to that extent. Yes.
Okay.
I wonder if he actually believes this because of religion, or if he had this idea already and he uses religion to justify it. That's my real question. I think that it's the latter. I think he has this idea, and I think he uses religion to try to justify this very wrong idea that he has of the world.
So if we're not supposed to talk about our feelings, what are we supposed to do with them?
I think there's better, like, I think joking is a way, like, there's better ways to talk about your feelings rather than crying in front of a therapist. Like, I think stand-up comedians, for example.
I've never cried in front of a therapist when I went to therapy. Just talk to the therapist. A lot of times we'd play chess, actually. I was a younger person. We play a lot of chess. So.
Are all fucked up.
Which is a really good thing. I mean, chess can really get you mentally stimulated, and maybe that's something that I needed back then. So. Like,
the best stand-up comedians have like all this trauma and stuff like that, and they put that into their craft. And I think it's a really effective way of turning.
What do you mean best stand-up comedians have a bunch of trauma? Who are you referring to? Like, I don't know that that's like true. I mean, listen, I enjoy people like Shane Gillis, Louis C.K., and that's pretty much, I can enjoy some Dave Chappelle sometimes. I love Jon Stewart, but that's more from a political perspective. What is he talking about? They have a bunch of trauma. I've never gotten this idea that they've had any trauma. I'm sure that they've had hardship in their life, but what's the trauma that he's referring to? He's just saying, yeah, they have a lot of trauma. Where? What are you talking
about? Trauma turning problems into something that's positive. They're spreading laughter. If you go to a stand-up comedy show,
there's a difference between having a struggle and trauma. What are we talking about?
A lot when I was in New York. And then COVID happened. I was saying that these people are just talking about their parents and their drug addictions and their relationships, and just like and then they find like a way to make fun of it instead of feel bad about it. They just kind of like make light of it, and it's therapeutic to be able to share that information with strangers and then laugh about it, and then you feel better after because you're not like bottling it down. But even then, you don't just need to do it in stand-up comedy. Like, sometimes you'll see like the super jack guy in the gym, and he's deadlifting like 400 pounds. I used to be me, and you're kind of like all that whatever's going on. I
feel like 400-pound deadlift's not a super jacked guy, but okay.
Letting it out in the gym, or when I'm sparring too, like, sometimes you get into a mode where you're angry and you're thinking about something that happened, what happened at work, and you just you let it out there, and afterwards you shake hands with the person. You might have a bloody nose, he might have hit you too, and in that moment now you're stronger, you're better at fighting, and you've let it out in a healthy way. So I think there's healthier.
Sure, I think that's a healthy way to do it. I just don't understand why you couldn't do both. Why would it be so bad to get your aggression out but then also talk about your feelings. And again, I think that that's something that men probably need more than women. I'm not saying women can't be benefiting from like that type of physical exertion, but then we could also benefit from talking sometimes. So, okay.
Ways to express negative feelings or channel that energy than therapy.
Okay. Can I think for a second?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions for me, by the way, so far?
Have I changed your mind on anything?
No.
Okay. How long have you been doing this?
Look, can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Are you under the impression that I don't already agree with you about most of what you're saying?
I was under that impression. I was under that impression, yeah.
I mean, is anything that I'm saying... So, like, for example, when you talk about, like, well, let me just toss a couple things out. So I completely agree with you that I think comedy can be very therapeutic. I think exercise can be very therapeutic. I think prayer can be very therapeutic. I think we have tons of scientific studies that support all of those things. We actually know that those are all very effective ways to manage mental health. And I think the other things that we know are that it's not exclusive to that. And in fact, I would say the mind is probably the organ of the body that can benefit from the most diverse kinds of things, as well as the optimal function of the mind requires a diversity of different things to be healthy. The mind actually needs the most balanced diet out of every organ in our body. I think humor, for example, is a very well-documented defense mechanism. When I have patients that I work with, we oftentimes, with the male patients, I will make dick jokes, and we will talk about making dick jokes.
Whoa, dude, that's sexual harassment, bro. Get this guy fired permanently. Permanently fire this guy. What's interesting is, as like I watch more Dr. K, I don't understand what Mr. Girl's issue ever was with this guy. I don't really get his fucking problem.
Do it very intentionally. And so after we go into a deep part of therapy where we're talking about something raw and real, we will do something like called
dicks.
come up for air by making a dick joke.
Can you tell me, what's your best dick joke?
Let me think about what's my best.
Damn, does he have like actual specific jokes? That I feel like he doesn't just run with jokes. It's more of like an in the moment thing, no? Isn't that the way it works?
Dick joke.
Dick joke.
Okay, that one I can't say.
You can say it on Rumble.
I don't know. I have.
That's the one I want to hear. I want to hear the one you can't say.
I know. Let me think. Let me see if I've got that one.
Okay.
Bruh.
I don't. So there's one that came to my mind, but usually the dick joke that I make is like in line with what we're talking about.
Okay.
Right. So like, like it's hard to describe it. Like, you can make dick jokes about whatever we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's not like I have a dick joke and it's like, hey, we just talked about your childhood trauma. Let me tell you a joke.
Yeah.
Knock knock. Knock knock.
Yeah. Who's there?
Your dick.
You'd have to be there. Oh my god.
Okay, that's a good one.
Because you went to therapy and it got lopped off, and now it's dangling out here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't even. That's a fucking awful joke, but it's just an example.
No, that was like a fine. That was better than what I was thinking. On the spot, that was good.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, if we get into something deep, I'm sure that my mind will come up with one, and then I'll share it with you at the time.
Okay.
Interesting.
So I mean, I don't actually disagree with a lot of what you're saying. I think I'd say that if anything, I think that your understanding of things I would describe as incomplete, not incorrect.
Okay.
Can you
explain why incomplete, not incorrect?
So that's what
Mr. Girl's issue is Dr. K led a content creator to take his own life. Who is that? What are you talking about? Based on what?
Was thinking about, and I'm going to get to. That's when I asked you. Do you have any questions for me?
How long have you been doing this?
What do you mean by this?
Talking to people crying on a couch.
Crying on a couch.
Oh, psychotherapy. Or psychiatry.
Being a therapist.
Okay, so I became a medical doctor.
Okay.
How has it been? I became a medical doctor 9 years ago.
Okay.
I started doing psychotherapy 8 years ago.
Okay.
I started to do psychotherapy very seriously 7 years ago. And then I became a fully trained psychiatrist 5 years ago.
Do you notice a common theme when you talk to streamers?
Yes, man.
What's this theme? Is it being terminally online and having a very interesting perspective of the world?
What is it?
Don't give away your trade secret.
Like when you talk to streamers, I mean, so many. So like, are you talking about specifically about streaming or?
No, when you talk to live streamers, because I've seen like that's one of your consistent. Yeah. Do you notice a common theme that's separate from other people? What do you notice about streamers?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you?
So I think at the top of the list is like we're all misfits to society. Like we can't. The reason we become successful at streamers is because we get rejected by the rest of the world, in some way. And then there's something about us that is.
You don't think that becoming the streamer makes you rejected by the world? Interesting.
Busted in school, in 9-to-5s, in standard jobs. And so we start something about us that is busted in school, in 9-to-5s, in standard jobs. And so we start streaming, and then something about this environment fits like a glove.
I I feel like this doesn't make any sense to me because nobody wants to do a 9 to 5. They typically have to, or 40-hour work week, whatever. You kind of just have to, and then you're able to somehow become a streamer. And you're like, oh my god, this is incredible. I don't think that there is something necessarily busted that's very unique about these individuals. Like, you know what? I just don't like a 9 to 5. As if everybody else is just like masturbating. Like, oh my god, I fucking can't wait to go to work my 9 to 5. I feel like it's just a thing where it's already a nobody really wants to do that, and then they get lucky, become a streamer. Like, I never can do that again. Like, they get adjusted to the lifestyle of being able to do their own thing on their own schedule, which is something that I like a lot as well. But they can't revert back to it, probably mostly because of like an ego issue, right? So like, I would never want to go back to a 9 to 5 or a 40-hour work week, but I keep that in my brain because I really don't want to ever be in a position where I give this, or that I'm like not prepared to do something else. Because I would feel like if I get into the mindset where like I won't do anything ever again, that's when you fail. You know.
So it's not one example of that. So that's the overarching theme, if you want one. But there are all kinds of different examples of that. So one is that the prevalence of ADHD among streamers, I think, is way higher than the regular population.
You think ADHD is real?
Yes.
It's an interesting question because there are some people who don't. I remember listening to Jordan Peterson because I have like diagnosed ADHD. I listened to Jordan Peterson and he had a really interesting perspective on ADHD. It wasn't that it wasn't necessarily real. It's that there seems to be more of a diagnosis for young men because of what I was saying before, and there's not enough of an outlet for their aggression, and it manifests as ADHD, but it's somewhat typical behaviors. So like have difficulty studying or being present mentally in class as a young man who has a lot of like physical energy they need to get out. Sitting down for 7 hours a day, working for 40 minutes per class, being able to focus, not talking, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, they told me I had ADHD when I was like 9 and 10. I used to take Ritalin.
I disagree. I really can't work a normal job without wanting to die, but my siblings who tried becoming a streamer or something similar felt the same way and preferred working for someone else. Interesting. I guess. I feel like the niceness. I feel like for the streaming, the issue with people not wanting to stream is having to basically violate like a legitimate boundary. It's very bizarre being like a streamer. It's just like a weird boundary thing that most people don't want to do. They don't want to put themselves out there like that. I don't think it's necessarily the 9 to 5 aspect. I think most people, in my opinion, would prefer to work a more, well, maybe that's not true, because not everybody can be self-motivating enough to stream. It's not like a hard thing to do, but you still have to, or not even to stream, to do like a work for yourself type thing where you're on your own schedule. I think that people can benefit a lot from structure. So maybe this is something else that needs to be explored, but maybe I'm wrong. That's something to think about.
And then all that stuff, I think it's a lie. It's especially because the fact that they say it's like a deficit. The fact that they say it's a disorder, I think is garbage. It's not a disorder. It's just a different way of thinking. Actually,
you could argue that with anything: autism, ADHD, Down syndrome, gender dysphoria. Saying it's not a disorder is just a different way of thinking. Generally speaking, when we classify disorders, we're classifying them based on the incongruency of a society and how much it makes it difficult for that individual to exist in there. So, for instance, a person with ADHD brain, if we had lived in a society that had class sizes of 1 to 5 instead of like 1 to 30, magically, then ADHD would maybe not ever be a problem. But that's just not how our society works. So you have that's how like different disorders work. They're social constructs. We're observing a very real thing, but we're the way we assign it is socially constructed, and based on the way that your society interacts is going to determine how whatever issues you have are going to interact with that society, right? Like if it makes any sense. But if you did make concessions and that's just how society was, ADHD might not be a problem anymore. But unfortunately, you can't necessarily get smaller class sizes to like 1 to 5 ratio. So, but yeah, sure.
I think it's a superpower. I think it's
superpower.
It's and calling it a disorder is
autism.
Incorrect.
Yeah,
that's only if you think that it's bad to call something a disorder. If you think that it's bad to have something that's like, I think it's classified in the DSM-5. Yeah, it is. I believe it's in the DSM-5. My understanding. Yeah, they're part of the neurodevelopmental disorders. It's only bad that you call ADHD a disorder if you think that having a disorder is a bad thing, but it's just a classification. So it doesn't really matter. Like, I don't take offense to have the people saying I have ADHD. It's not the negative to have something like that to me. It's just an acknowledgement of a thing.
So I think that too is not something that I entirely disagree with. I wouldn't say you're wrong about that. I work with many people, myself included, who are probably somewhere on the ADHD spectrum, and I've come to see the way that my mind works as a gift. Sure. At the same time, so I think this is one area. In
Same here, guys. I can play video games and watch stuff at 1.5 speed. That's my fucking gift, dude. What?
I would, if I had to judge what you say, one area in which you're incomplete is that you tend to make a lot of generalizations. So I don't hear in you that ADHD is variable amongst different people. I don't hear that conception when you speak. So you say, it wasn't a disorder for me, which is fair enough. Ritalin for me didn't work, which is fair enough. But you don't know what the experience of everyone else with ADHD is like. And for some people, it is a crippling disorder. And what we mean by crippling disorder is that they cannot function in the world because they cannot get their mind to focus in the worst cases of ADHD.
I think that puts the blame on something that's genetic or something that's innate rather than just saying it's misled focus or like misdirection. For example.
Well, I mean, sometimes you do have things that are, I guess, just biological or inherent that make it difficult to function in a particular society's concept, you know?
This is guy on Twitter.
Like, I imagine that fucking sociopaths used to do really well during, like, the Viking times. Because they could just fucking do whatever they want, you know? They can kill whoever the fuck they, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, this is awesome, you know?
And he talks about how a meth head is almost identical to an Elon Musk CEO billionaire. A meth head has all this energy that instead of he's putting it into a Fortune 500 company, he's just putting it into the pipe. You know, he's digging holes in the backyard looking for China. As soon as you put that guy in the right direction and you can put him to something where he can direct all that meth energy, something that's positive, he's the same. Like, those people are very similar. They're two sides of the same coin. Yeah, so they have more in common with the average person.
I think that's a little bit of a simplification, but I'll think about that one.
That's what confuses me, because I would agree with you 100%. I mean, the majority of clinical practice that I've done is like actually addiction psychiatry. And I would completely agree with you that the majority of my patients who are addicted to stuff have an immense amount of energy, are incredibly resilient, or oftentimes highly intelligent, and helping them channel that into healthier things leads to excellent outcomes.
Interesting.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all.
But why are generalizations like that a bad thing? Because, like, I don't think there's anyone that said...
Well, I think that the issue is what they would get addicted to, right? And if so, I imagine someone like Elon Musk would be addicted to success, whereas somebody like a drug addict would be addicted to drugs. And it can be difficult to redirect them or give them the opportunity to move in that direction. Because somebody like Elon Musk, who was born wealthy and will die wealthy, their likeliness of success... What the fuck was that? Oh, okay. Their likeliness of success is pretty much guaranteed. So when they move and do something, they know that they're going to be successful. All they have to do is do a thing, and they know it's going to work out because it's basically because they know that they come from like a good area. Whereas someone that's a fucking meth addict, they might not be like, you know what, let me just start investing into my own company, right? Also, they're addicted to meth, so you know, there's a couple of different. There's a few new struggles there.
There's no exception for cancer. You know, cancer is something that it just happens, right? There's either, oh, cancer was actually really good for my lungs. You know?
Hold on. Okay. So I have spoken with a ton of patients that I was very confused by when they would say things like cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I'd be like, bro, what are you talking about? Right? And then I would listen to them. And that's when there are cases of cancer where, like, here I am, I'm 36, I'm not taking care of myself, I'm not taking care of my family, I'm like, like, whatever, life is like, whatever, I'm bitching all the time, like, I'm not really doing anything with my life. And then you tell someone, hey, you could have 1 year to live. And they're like, oh, shit. Like, I've got 1 year to live, and, like, I don't want to die, like, I hate my life.
1 year to live, time to goon.
Like, but I don't want to die, I want to live. And then 6 months later, after chemotherapy, they have a surgical resection, they shrink the cancer, they remove it from the body, and then they discover that you're cancer-free. And suddenly someone is like, thank God. I was dead at 35, and at 36, post-cancer, I'm starting to live life. I've started to realize that life is precious. And I can stop taking shit for granted. Yeah.
Was that Walter White?
I don't know.
Oh,
okay.
I mean, I don't know Walter White well enough to know his quotes.
Damn. Is that a thing to bring back?
I mean, so, you know, it's humbling. And I think why is it bad to make generalizations? Because I think human beings have different experiences.
That's true.
Sure.
And what works for one person doesn't work for someone else. And that's also where, I mean, I've met my fair share of people, myself included, who got way more out of spirituality.
Yo, Papa God, how much would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Oh, that's a really good question. I feel like, don't they though? Isn't that why they're called a woodchuck? I've never understood that.
Than I did out of therapy, like way more. So what transformed my life was spirituality, not a psychotherapy.
I've been thinking, like, do I want to live to get that old? Like, is that positive, or do I want to like go out in a blaze of glory? Because I feel like it's a very normal thing for a guy to have this imagination of them dying in like just a legitimate blaze of glory, like some awesome fucking event that happens in their life where they get to go down swinging. I think about that, you know, and it's like, when would be the perfect time for that? You know, because you really want to live till 80 years old? Do you really want to live till 80? Or do I want to have like something fucking awesome happen to me, like 62? where I'm already on my way out, but I'm still there. And then I'm remembered as like, damn, you remember when Dad stood up and he killed like fucking 5 terrorists, bow, 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 and he fucking died, but he was such a badass. Instead of like 85, and it's like, ah, man, you remember when Dad didn't used to diarrhea all over himself while he drooled? You know, I think about that sometimes.
You did DMT in Peru?
No, I spent 7 years studying to become a monk in India.
Oh, okay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Can you levitate?
Purple.
No.
Oh,
Still working on that one. Then I went to med school. If I had stayed with it, maybe I would be able to at this point.
okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so like I said, I think the main thing in which I'm sort of hearing is not that you're wrong. I mean, I think that it's most. I want to even say that most psychiatrists or psychotherapists would agree with a lot of what you're saying. That humor has therapeutic value, that prayer has therapeutic value, that just talking about your emotions. I actually think a lot of psychotherapists, well, it's not that it's a waste of time, but I think many people, myself included, I don't want people to come to my office and just talk about their emotions. That's not what we're here for. We're here to do work. We're here to help someone get better, and we're here to help someone go, like, my goal with all of my patients is for them to never come back.
Yeah.
What's the longest you've had a patient? 5 years.
7 years. 6 years.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ask me what my average amount of time to spend with a patient is.
What is it?
Because you're asking about the longest.
Yeah, it was average 3 months?
6 to 12 months.
Interesting.
Probably around under a year, I would say.
That's one.
I would want to know, like, do you think that they would have benefited from staying in therapy, or do you think that for the most part they didn't need it anymore?
Once a week of yapping?
Sometimes more than yapping. Sometimes jerking each other off.
Huh?
There's your dick joke.
That was kind of funny. There it is. Yeah, I like that one. That one was perfect. That's funny. Okay.
Nice. I didn't expect that one. It came out of nowhere.
Destiny is debating Cenk Uyghur in 5 minutes. Oh shit. I have to watch that.
Why? Were you interested? Is that because you seemed? It seems like you got, you know.
No, it was just a surprise.
You sure?
Yeah.
How are you feeling now?
Uncomfortable.
Right?
Yeah.
Damn, you
Okay.
made Sneako uncomfortable, huh?
I'll be.
I guess he's too emotionally vulnerable down Dr. K, and now he's feeling uncomfortable. Damn, fucked up.
Would it help if I apologize? I don't need.
No,
to.
it's fine. If you're joking, then it's okay.
Okay.
And if I wasn't?
I told you this shit is a liberal gay psyop. This is how people become transgender. They go, you're proving my point.
I don't think you're proving his point. If anything, you've become very vulnerable. And if he's actually a little upset about this or offended, then it's because he's in such a vulnerable state that he just isn't comfortable with this kind of stuff right now because he's open. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's hilarious how a tiny little joke can make you so uncomfortable. Sorry, that was demeaning. I apologize. It was denigrating.
Yeah, because he made a joke about your tiny dick. That was his joke there.
Yeah.
Anyway, shall we get back to it?
Yes.
So I would say that, so that's how long I've been doing it. So I would say the longest patient is 6 years, but even in that case, the patient has done well for extended periods of time. So they'll be like done with therapy for about 2 years, and then something will happen, and they'll call, and then we'll kind of work through it. We'll work together for about 6 months, and then we'll take a break for 8 months, and something else happens.
Interesting.
And that's usually what that looks like.
3 to 6
There are
months.
definitely some patients who need ongoing emotional support, but those people I think tend to have difficulties with the basic day-to-day skills that lead to wellness. So either they are they're in a situation where they can't exercise their
Trish is going to be on H3 show tonight, I think. I don't know if that's something I really care to engage with, to be honest with you. The fucking new frenemies arc. I don't know.
cognitively in a space where they really can't regulate their emotions and they require someone else's like support in an ongoing basis. I've absolutely worked with people like that. But I don't think that's the majority of people. The exception rather than the rule.
Okay.
What do people usually come by? Like, what are normal people going through right now?
What do you mean by that?
What's the average person coming into the therapy? Like, what are people dealing with? What patterns are you noticing? You're saying that streamers are ADHD rejects who are attention-seeking narcissists. What about the average person? Why are they coming in to pay for services?
Are you talking about the average person in general? The average person
like
that sees me?
a 9 to 5. Yeah, the average person that sees you. Like, what are you noticing
Yeah,
as
so
a
people
common
see
theme
me
right
for a different reason. So I think people see me that are a little bit less enamored with therapy and psychiatry. So given my background of like complementary and alternative medicine and the fact that I studied to become a monk, like people will come to me because they don't want to be on medication, because they want to optimize their performance in some way. So, and most people come to me because they are interested in like understanding themselves better and mastering themselves more.
Okay.
Okay.
And sometimes they've got like, oftentimes something will push them into my office.
How many of his patients come from his work online? I wonder if is this like a secondary platform, or is this now his primary way that he gets patients?
Like, so for example, people are afraid that like their anxiety is getting in the way of work, but most of the time it's not. It's like, I want to be free of this. I want to be able to enjoy life. I want to be able to do a good job at work. I'm tired of worrying about stuff that I know is not important.
Interesting.
and they want help with that. And I think that
maybe my wife could use this therapist.
most people will figure it out. I think it's just having someone who is an expert in the material. It's way easier to learn, right? I can figure out how to surf if I spend enough time in the ocean, but having someone who knows how to surf teach me, I'll just learn way faster.
Right.
So, and this is kind of where I have some questions for you, but and I think that's really what we do as therapists.
Just help people focus up.
Help people understand how, or this is what I try to do. I try to help people understand like how a human works. So when I ask you, for example, what are the mechanisms of prayer? How does prayer work? How does it work? How does it not work? What does therapy do, not do? So like the questions that I have for you, and if you want an impression of fixing what I think is incomplete about your understanding, we can start that.
Okay.
You have other questions, or can I dive in?
You can dive in. Wait, before you dive in, can I go pee?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, go to bed.
Yeah.
All right, they're
Okay.
They're peeing. They peed together.
Okay. So let me ask you something. What is an emotion?
It's a feeling.
Okay. What is a feeling? Why do we have emotions as humans?
I imagine just
As a reaction to what we see and experience.
Okay. What is the purpose of an emotion?
The purpose of an emotion? I don't think there is one. I think they just happen.
Okay.
These are interesting questions. I have no idea. I mean, I figure this is just how you're born. I don't really have a in-depth understanding of why we have emotions. I imagine because we just do.
So that sounds very. I'm trying to think about. Okay, so I'm going to try to convince you that that's incorrect.
Okay.
Okay. So first of all, we can take the God angle. Like I don't think God is omniscient, right?
What does omniscient mean?
I mean, I imagine the reason we have emotions is it's just because, like, historically, I don't know, that's just how we evolved to have emotions, and those emotions, generally speaking, were a benefit to us, and so we just kept having them. I mean, I talked before about how friendliness can be a very positive behavior because it can help you kind of teach and grow and learn as a society, and so I imagine that's why we have emotions. No, I mean, it makes sense to me at least. So, okay. Got it.
One?
All-knowing.
Okay.
So like God made us this way, right?
Yes.
God gave us emotions.
Yes.
So like God doesn't do nothing. This is something for no reason. He's not like, hey, I'm gonna fuck with the human race, and I'm gonna give you all emotions. I'm gonna make this human, and in order for y'all to be whatever, like I'm gonna just toss in emotions. Like so, we exist for a reason. Like everything within us, every part of us exists for a reason. So we have eyes for a reason, we have nose for a reason, we have mouth for a reason, we have dicks for a reason, right?
Sure.
You're not liking the dick jokes anymore?
No, you're doing good. That wasn't really a joke. You just said it, but.
Okay. So we have emotions for a reason. So like in what I would say, if someone asked me the question, what are emotions for? I would say that emotions are a source of information and a source of motivation. So for example, if I walk into a room and there's like tension in the air, I'm going to feel emotionally uncomfortable.
Yes.
Or if I walk into a room and everyone was laughing and then suddenly everyone goes silent, what do you think is the emotion that you would feel?
When everyone's laughing.
I don't know. Is it paranoia an emotion, or is it just a feeling? But I would feel paranoid if that's happened there.
When then I say joke, everyone goes silent?
No. So everyone's joking and you walk into the room and everyone looks at you and shuts
The
up.
purpose of emotions is to protect ourselves. At least is what you learn in therapy. Okay, that's interesting. It makes sense. That kind of makes sense.
Embarrassment?
I guess in every capacity. I mean, if you're more friendly, that's not an emotion, is it? Or if you're happy, those are different signals that you're like, oh, I'm happy here. I can feel protected with this group. Or I'm like, I'm unhappy here. I won't feel protected with this group. I guess that makes sense.
Right? So like if you think about that, why would you feel embarrassed? Because you know they're talking about you. How do you know they're talking about you?
Because the whole energy shifts.
Exactly. And the energy shift, by the way, is all neurologically mediated. So your eyes notice the change in behavior. Your ears notice the change. You can sense things. So you're getting sensory input. That sensory input gets processed very, very, very quickly, but in a very, very primitive way. It's not like a logical thing that your mind runs through. Your brain gets all the sensory input, and then it reacts with an emotion.
Yes.
And then if we think about emotions prepare us. They prepare the whole body to act in a particular way. Okay? So for example, if I feel angry, all kinds of stuff happens. I'm more willing to fight mentally. Agreed?
Yes.
Sure.
I have adrenaline pumping through my system, which increases the blood flow to my skeletal muscles, decreases the blood flow to my visceral organs. So I stop digesting things. Liver doesn't need blood. Stomach doesn't need blood. Colon doesn't need blood. We need blood flow to our arms, our legs. Our mind starts thinking in terms of black and white when we're angry. So we stop seeing nuance. We stop being empathic. And that way, when we need to throw down, we can throw down. So anger helps us throw down. It makes us more motivated to throw down. It makes us more likely to throw
I
down.
mean, it makes sense. It makes sense that you'd want all those things. You wouldn't exactly want to be in the most empathetic mood when you're angry. Okay.
Okay.
Interesting.
And if I walk up to you and I slap you across the face, you will get angry. And that anger is good, right? You see that? Like it serves a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it removes your empathy from the other person, and it puts you into like this fight or flight where, you know, your adrenaline starts pumping. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Sure. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so emotions are sources of information and sources of action. Now, the next thing is that emotions are not always useful. Sometimes our emotions can lead us in the wrong direction. Agree?
Yes.
Has that ever happened to you?
Of course.
Do you feel comfortable sharing an example about that?
To where an emotion led me in the wrong direction?
Yeah.
Does horny count?
Sure.
Just fucking focusing on women instead of what I was supposed to do.
True. Gooning a little too much. I'll tell you that. I think that's one of the best things about being married is like it kind of reshifts your focus as a guy and kind of gets you the sex to not be like a primary motivator because, you know, you have sex and like other things become more of a focus. Like, you can't talk to other girls now, which can be a very good thing. And now let me focus on like actually getting my shit together, you know?
Happens like on stream all the time. Or fear. I think
your pee
something
gets
using
hard?
drugs to cope with fear.
Sorry,
Okay. In the past.
Sure.
Okay, so like yeah, so I mean I think that's actually I love those examples because I think they really speak to.
What do I want to do?
So when we have emotions, so they can be useful, but they can also, like, if we're not in control of them, if we don't really understand where they come from or why they come from a particular place, and we're not able to regulate them, we get into trouble, right?
Right.
So then, are you? By the way, are you kind of is this okay? What we're doing?
Yeah,
right now?
I'm following. You're explaining the use of emotions.
Yeah. So and then I think that, like, so this is where we kind of come to emotions such as crying or as a weakness, and that's kind of where I'm going with this. Is that I think so, in my opinion, or expertise, or call it whatever you want to, like, you will be a more effective human being if you can understand and even to a certain degree control, if you have a better relationship with your emotions. In the same way that we can train our muscles or our breathing, we can also train our mind.
Okay.
Right. I agree.
Right. And so I think one of the key parts of that training is a better relationship with our emotions, and specifically to understand. So sometimes we will also have inappropriate emotions. So a good example of this is, let's say that I get anxious asking for a raise from my boss. Even though I've worked really hard, I feel I deserve it, but something has happened to me over the course of the way that my brain formed, where asking someone for a favor or something that I believe I deserve results in anxiety.
Yeah.
So that's like a bad situation, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And in this scenario, I imagine you would say, go work out, pray, and gas yourself up in some way, and then go demand what you are owed. Go and be strong, right?
Yeah, but that might actually be negative, because then you're not. You still want to be some kind of like emotional, or empathetic. You don't want to go into like a pumped up state to me that communicates some level of anger. No?
I wouldn't say gas yourself up, but yeah.
What would you say?
Work on yourself. Like, just work on something.
Well, yeah, but now we're talking about an immediate solution. So you're working at a job and you feel like you're entitled to a raise, and how do you go about asking for that raise in a constructive manner? It's like, okay, go work out is nice, but what do you do in the short term to be able to build that confidence and go like, hey, listen, like, I think I deserve a raise, and here are my reasons why.
Work for your future self. Gas yourself up, I think, is inflating your ego. I don't think you should inflate. I think you should earn it. So work.
Okay, so work. And yeah, so I think like that's a fair perspective. So I think a lot of another thing to understand is sometimes the way that our emotions get wired are based on our experiences. So for example, like, let's say that, like, I don't know, I mean, this is kind of a random ass example, but let's say that one of my parents was a clown and one of my parents was physically abusive. And then what happens is, since they were wearing their clown costume when they were physically abusive, when I was 5 years old, I learned to fear clowns. So my brain formed associations, which is what brains do, that when I see big floppy shoes and a big red nose, that means that I'm in danger. And so this is the way that our brain wires based on experiences. Does that make sense?
Okay, interesting.
You follow me?
Yes.
Okay. So then what happens is, like, I'm 35 years old, I'm at my kid's 6th birthday party, and someone invited a clown, which I've been avoiding, which means I start having anxiety and panic because my brain has learned a long time ago, when my neurons were still forming, that clowns mean danger. Clowns mean run away. Okay?
Yes.
And so now I've got this problem where, like, I need to rewire my brain. I need to, even though intellectually I understand that clowns are not dangerous, there's a part of my body and my brain that responds in a way that is separate from my intellect. It's primitive. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
So there are many ways to do that. One of the most effective ways to reprogram yourself is psychotherapy. So psychotherapy is the process of understanding. So for example, like, I'll just give you like an actual example. So there's a kind of psychotherapy called EMDR.
I know. Yeah. I'm aware. Your eyes, it's like hypnosis. Your eyes follow, and you're supposed to forget traumatic past. Like people, I heard about EMDR.
Yeah. So it's not that you forget traumatic past. It's that normally when we think about a particular memory, and I'm sure that if we talked long enough, I could ask you about particular memories, and those memories would trigger emotional reactions with you, right?
Yep.
Okay, and you could do the same with me. We could talk about whatever, and we would have some emotions. Now, the problem is that when people have something like PTSD, the size of their reaction is debilitating. So, like, when I hear, like, if I'm a Vietnam War vet or something like that, or an Iraqi war vet, and I hear a door slam, my mind literally goes back to being in a combat scenario. I stop, drop, and roll. I'm trying to duck under fire, but, like, I'm at a bus stop dropping my kid off.
Interesting. But that would be, in some capacity, PTSD is almost a positive thing. Not, like, actually, but in the sense of, like, let's say you still lived in the environment that gave you PTSD. When you hear a door slam, there's a very high likeliness that it is a life-threatening scenario where you'd want to drop to the floor. And so your body has changed through this trauma, but it's conditioned itself based on the environment that it thought it was in. It's just interesting how, like, these reactions are almost positive. It's just weird. But they're not, but they are. They're not positive for a normal society, but in an abnormal society, PTSD is like a very good thing. Okay.
So that shit needs to be rewired. And so the way that EMDR works is we actually have those people recall that stuff, but the way that we move our eyes, since our attention is somewhere else.
You're supposed to look back and forth to forget things. Does it actually work though?
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, I'm going to say yes. But there is certainly a camp of people in the psychiatry and psychotherapy community
say don't
that think that EMDR, the therapeutic benefit of EMDR is been overblown, and it's not everything that everyone thinks it is.
Interesting.
So that's kind of anyway. So
How does that work? It puts you in a relaxed state? Because it doesn't sound like Sneako keeps saying you forget stuff, but he's...
Sebastian Boas super chatted $1.99. Hey daddy, my first time in the stream as I cream.
Incredible stuff. I love it. But it sounds like what Dr. K is saying is that you don't forget it. You just almost reorient your brain to have a more proportionate reaction. And it's like, I wonder, does that work? I mean, being in like a calm meditative, I mean, that's what it sounds like, a calm meditative state. You're focusing on something else. Interesting.
So EMDR is just a good example. What we're trying to do is almost like split your mind and prevent that emotional reaction. So now we're going to talk about this stuff, but since you're concentrating over here, you're not actually paying attention to the memory, and then you get desensitized to it. It's a desensitization therapy, right? So what we're trying to do is like stop a automatic.
I feel like if you have PTSD, your best bet is to engage in exposure therapy, which kind of exposes you to the things that you're afraid of. And so like if you're afraid of, for instance, like loud door slamming, your best bet is to marry an Italian woman, because they're obnoxious and they just constantly slam things and they're like, hey, where's the fucking sauce? I need more sugar for my gravy. Yeah. It's stupid.
Reaction by retraining
I love
the
Italian
brain,
women.
actually, and the body.
Don't
Is that
worry.
even possible?
They love me too.
100%. I mean, with desensitization, you can desensitize. You have been desensitized.
But you're trying to like, trick yourself into doing it. Is like the eye movement
Not
actually
trick.
doing it, or is it the process of thinking about it and...
It's the process of having your attention in one place so that all of your attention does not gravitate towards the traumatic memory. That's the mechanism, in my opinion.
Okay.
So I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but like, let me put it to you this way. Let's say, well, what's an example? So let's say that you're about to have sex. So in this
Nice.
moment,
Boobs.
your full
Nice.
attention is on whatever the stimulus of sex is. And so you're very involved in it. You have an emotional reaction, you have a physical reaction. But let's say that someone is like trying to seduce you, but you're
Do you mean PB Jenny? Is that what you're talking about? This what you're referring to? Or?
playing a video game. So your attention is split. So even though there's like this naked person over here who's trying to seduce you, your
True.
physiologic reaction, your mental reaction is not going to happen because your mind is over here. And on the flip
Right.
side, one of the treatments for premature ejaculation is to think about other stuff while you're having sex.
Correct. Or I think
That's what I do. I try to think about big black dudes when I'm having sex, so I don't come too fast. But unfortunately now, it's had the reverse effect. You know.
porn has actually fucked up a lot of people's minds. They become kind of desensitized and have weird expectations and think about different things, what they should be doing. Or porn is the quickest way that people become desensitized to sex and are out of the moment. And
Sure, maybe.
Yes. So I think like these are examples of like psychotherapy. Does that sound weak to you?
yes,
How so?
because you couldn't deal with it yourself. You need to pay to do it.
What?
So like,
Like asking for help is a sign of weakness. Like even though everybody needs help sometimes, it is weakness. If I
That doesn't make any sense. He doesn't even believe that. Sneako doesn't believe that. And the reason is because before Dr. K they were just talking in general. They were having a little camaraderie and they were bonding. And he's like, well, do you think it's a good or a bad thing? I'm paraphrasing, and Sneako's like, oh, I think it's a good thing because it's good to have friends. Is basically what he communicated. That's how I interpreted it. So asking for help, having friends is asking for some form of help, even if it's not explicit. So you don't believe what you're saying. I think it's a weakness in not being able to ask for help. There's a difference between asking for help and relying too much on help, right? Somebody asking for help, like, hey, can you help me move? Or can I talk to you for a little bit about something that's bothering me? There's nothing wrong with that. That's different than becoming super dependent on that. You know, it's one thing to be like, hey, can I borrow $100? It's another thing to continuously ask to borrow $100 every other week, right? That's the difference between asking for help versus being too reliant on that help. So it's not a weakness to ask for help.
can't climb up a ladder, I need somebody to hold it, then I'm too weak to climb up a ladder by myself. Same thing with
Okay.
psychotherapy.
okay, so needing help from anyone makes you weak.
Weak in whatever that is, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you value independence.
Yes.
And so like, let's say that you're in a car accident and you need a surgeon's help. You're weak in that moment because you can't.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Literally, your body's weak.
I mean, yeah, he would say literally, like, that's not an emotional weakness, though. He would be like, I'm literally physically weak. So I need, but this is a good way to go down, though. He's like, okay, so you're physically weak. Do you think that there's times where you could be emotionally weak and needed some kind of an emotional surgeon? And you'd be like, oh, actually, interesting.
So you need help. But that's right, yeah.
Is that bad or is that acceptable?
I don't know about good or bad is the best way to describe it, but you're more optimized and you're a more complete person, more independent, reliable if you're able to deal with yourself.
I thought he was talking about the surgeon thing.
You're more competent. Competence means that you need the least amount of help.
Do you have an emotional reaction to being weak?
Not all the time. In places where I think I should be competent and I realize I'm not, that makes me feel inadequate. Yeah, I don't like that. But if it's something I'm not good at and I do need to ask for some help or some information, then I'm okay to learning things. But when it's my area of expertise, when it's something that I've trained and worked at, and I need help, it's like there's disappointment, and there's anger that I'm not better.
Well, sounds like an ego issue, though. No, wouldn't that be like a negative that you have such like an ego so much in the way that you can't ask for some kind of constructive help?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about like PTSD for a second, right?
Yeah.
And sort of this idea of an inappropriate reaction.
Yes.
On the same page that happens?
Yeah, DIY, dude. Do DIY surgery. It's a really good idea. I like that as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. How do you know that the disappointment that you feel in yourself is appropriate? So like, let's take two scenarios. One is you secretly have PTSD and that all of the thoughts that you have are a equally inappropriate reaction. How does someone know the difference?
How does someone know the difference between
An appropriate disappointment and an inappropriate disappointment?
I think that he's going to just say God. No, isn't that going to be his answer? It's a very interesting question, though. Like having this is almost in line with what I've been talking about of like productive versus unproductive shame, where I was talking about how like I don't think you should shame fat people for being fat, but people should feel a sense of shame for being fat, but like constructive shame, so that they'll like, okay, I need to do better, right?
I mean, if you're disappointed, depends on why you're disappointed. If you're disappointed for selfish reasons, then that's it's inappropriate. If you're disappointed because you should have been, and it shows that you are trying to seek out more competence, then I think that's appropriate. It's good motivation. It's like, say you miss like, okay, I used to play soccer when I was a kid, but I missed a penalty shot and I've been working on the penalty shot for a while. I think it's appropriate that I'm disappointed that I didn't hit the game-winning goal. And that motivation there, that disappointment means I'm going to keep training harder and then make sure the next time we're in the game that I hold my team on my back and get the goal. That's appropriate. I'm disappointed.
Okay.
How do you get better though without getting help? Doesn't a coach help you?
Let me just think for a second. Okay, so in this case, what you do with disappointment is try harder, practice, get better, right? So negative emotion isn't bad. It drives you towards positive action.
Yes, I think negative emotion pushed in the right direction. And same thing with ADHD, like a lack of focus, I guess, in school. A lot of like where they attribute negativity or disorders, if you channel that in the right place, it's extremely effective. So being inadequate in something, feeling disappointed, feeling worthless, that is good motivation. That's good fuel to become better. I think a lot of
well, okay, just to be clear, I think there's a difference between feeling inadequate and feeling worthless. Okay, so I understand what he's saying fundamentally, but there's a difference. Like, it's okay to you can have in general, if you break everything down to just stress, it's good to have stress in life as long as you can overcome that stress. I mean, I think that's the fundamental of what we're really talking about here.
I can see. So if I take that fuel...
Hey, thank you so much for the 10-month small gut from Matthew T. First time catching the stream. Goon Gang. Incredible stuff.
That disappointment, and I go sit on someone's couch, and I cry it out, and I'm no longer disappointed, then I don't end up improving.
Yes, and that's how a lot of women, and why I attribute therapy goers to like effeminate liberals, because when women...
Yeah, but if let's say you're disappointed in something when you go to a therapist, wouldn't the therapist help you go through your disappointment by getting you to have a more positive relationship with your disappointment? So like, let's say by helping you engage with coping mechanisms, not by saying it's okay, you don't have to change, but by saying here's how you change. What is his, like, why his understanding of therapy is very bizarre.
Women are disappointed. It's sad. They call up their friends and they say, let's eat chocolate and drink wine until we feel better. Right? Men will say, hey.
Right, but that's not eating is generally not a productive thing to do. A therapist isn't. That's like, if anything, that's why you'd go to a therapist. Hey, I have a really bad relationship with my food, but I don't know how to change it in a constructive way. I need help. So what is he talking about? Like, okay.
Get on this bench and get to 225. Like, that's our way of getting through something. You know, if my friend's ever down about a girl or down about something, I'm like,
okay.
You know, I'm not going to try to cope for it. It's just like, let's get back to it. The best solution is forward.
Yes.
You don't think that it might be okay to talk to your friend that's like upset from a breakup and be like, hey man, this sucks. Like, you want to talk about it for a little bit? And then after they talk about it a bit, being like, hey, let's go out. Because if anything, to me, again, it's not good. It's not bad to distract your mind or anything, but if anything, to me, it sounds like you're just incapable of having mature conversations with like your friends that go through a hard time. And so instead, you're just like, let's just go work out but sometimes it's okay to be sad. That's how you process your emotions. So like being sad and talking about it and just kind of getting it out in different ways, that's not a bad thing. It's silly that he suggests otherwise, but okay.
So I've got a couple of kind of questions about that. One is, so like that's what works for you, right?
Yes.
And is it possible that different things work for different people?
Yes, that's true. My initial reaction was like, no, I was going to say, well, no, there's one right way. Actually, that's true, but there's a better way. Yeah, it can't work for most people, but I think God created men to be leaders and women to be the nurturers. So I think God wants us to be as competent as possible, and we should be strong. Of course, we work for other people, but the most optimal way is to work through it. It's just to work through it instead of talk about it and sit in it.
Yeah. So and when you say optimal, like you're basing that idea of optimal because how do you know that that's optimal? Because your primary data set is you, right?
Yes.
And so you're basing optimal on your own experience.
Correct, but also information, talking to other people, looking at history.
Yeah. Okay, but so now is where I get confused. And I swear to God, I'm not trying to convince you of shit. Okay, I'm not trying to.
I can tell.
The problem with like looking at it through a historical lens is that none of what you're saying makes any sense. So specifically on the woman argument of like men are supposed to lead, I think that men are fine leaders. But I think it's good to have a female presence as well. I think a good mixture based on different jobs require different things. But when you say historically, you go like, well, historically, men used to lead and men were very successful. That's true. And now we live in a society where women can lead, and we're the most successful civilization and advanced civilization that we've ever seen. So to look at it from a historical sense, it's like, well, if you look historically where we are now, back then it was mostly only men, and they were successful in different ways. And now we have women leaders, and we are the most objectively most successful any society's ever been. Unless the Egyptians had streaming or something, I don't know, or instant porn. No. So by your own logic, looking at things historically, you're not really looking at anything historically. You have a preconceived idea of the world and how you think it should be run, and you're using things around you to justify that. So like I imagine he's only really religious because it agrees with some of the ideas that he already has, or he looks back at history and he's like, well, look, society used to have guys and they would run everything and they were so cool. So that must be it. But it's like, well, if you actually parse this information intelligently, your idea of the world is wrong, right? So, yeah.
So, but what I'm curious about is like, if you've never really tried therapy, how do you know that it is inferior to the things that you're doing?
I told you I did try.
I wouldn't call that trying it.
You went and saw a girl with big tits.
I would call that going to the ocean, going to the beach and saying I don't like swimming when you don't get in the water. Right? You went into that room, you saw the big tits, you activated a script, and you started flexing. You didn't actually do therapy.
Well, you can just look at the history of men, and you can look at the history of world leaders and people who have it's literally, time is the most valuable currency. That's the most valuable thing. Money's not real. So you think about what are we spending that holds the most weight, and it's time, because all of our time is limited. We're all going to die one day. And if our time is being spent wasted talking about how to get better instead of getting better or improving, that's wasted time.
But that's the thing, is that when you talk about how to get better, in the most senses, you don't know how to get better. There's a reason why businesses do business meetings. It's a reason why the most successful companies will sit down and they will think. They will sit there and they will bounce ideas off of each other. That's your therapy. You know, successful businesses don't just go in and say, let's just do this thing. It'll work. It's perfect. We're done. They'll go in and they'll say like, okay, we want to do something innovative. What can we do? They'll parse through data. They'll talk about it with people. They'll do a lot of different things. They'll effectively go through therapy. The most successful businesses are effectively doing therapy in-house every single day, bouncing ideas off each other, parsing through different information to come to a conclusion of like, this is probably the best way to go. That's what therapy is. Therapy is just sitting down and parsing through information with somebody else to help you figure out what's your best next step. So like in his world where he thinks that things are very simple, like of course it's like, well, all I need to do is work out and things get better. And that's great. You should work out, by the way. But when it comes down to it, there are people that don't necessarily know how to move. Like let's say for me, I'm overweight and like I know what to do, but like I have trouble sticking to a plan. Like I know I should be going to the gym and working out. This is very real. I know I should be eating better, but there's something that just keeps fucking me up. And so maybe if I went to therapy and I talked about this openly, honestly, and vulnerably, we would start to have a conversation. Maybe the therapist could be like, well, you know, this, and this, these are your different behavioral protocols that you need to change or you need to fix, and it'll start to improve your life. And it's like, okay. And then you start to work on those behavioral protocols and then you kind of move forward. I think that's what it's about. Right. Because like, yeah, it's very simple to just go to the gym, but like, let's say the motivation doesn't exist there for some reason, you know, maybe there's a protocol you need to engage with. That's how that works. That's how therapy works. So
effective use of our time is forward, is progress, is creating something more, is inspiring more people, is building something. That is the most effective use of
How do
every
you know what
second.
the right direction is?
God tells me. God wants us to create. God wants us to be strong. God wants us to be able to provide. And all the time spent that I am sitting in therapy crying is time that my competition is getting better. It's time.
So then what's the productive nature of the conversation that Sneako's having right now? Wouldn't it be better served for him to just stay in the gym permanently? Because that's the thing too, is that like even when it comes to working out, you can only work out so much before it becomes unproductive. You working out is 50% recovery.
John Pon09 super chatted $1.99. First timer here. Thanks for the content.
Thanks, man. I know you're a first timer. I've never seen you before.
Time spent where I am not working on what I'm supposed to be doing.
So I'm not quite sure what you think about data, and we can talk about that if you're not into like data or science. But like, so here's kind of my experience, and I'm just sharing it. I'm not trying to convince you here.
Right.
Actually, let me close off one point about what therapy is. So, in the case of something like EMDR or PTSD, it's literally trying to rewire ourselves. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a really good example of this. That a lot of times our behaviors. So I noticed that you're smoking something and you're drinking Red Bull, right? So our behaviors are tied to certain internal impulses, and that the better we understand the relationship between our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors, the better control we will have over the whole system. So cognitive behavioral therapy has been designed to teach people to better control usually their behaviors, but oftentimes their thoughts and their emotions as well. So we can create the instrument that we want. And emotional competence is a big part of this. And a big part of emotional competence is familiarity with your emotions, getting in and like playing with the Play-Doh of your emotions. And frequently in that kind of way, it involves things like tears, right? So if I have something that I'm super sad about and super hurt about, and I shove it down or I drink or whatever, and I don't engage in healthy behaviors, one way to sort of fix that is to actually like cry, let that stuff up and out, and kind of exercise it from the body. And the value, I think, is sort of this. I mean, maybe not the same because it sounds like he thinks prayer is superior, but you even said that, you know, people will go through some level of, I would call it catharsis, where they're at Mecca, all these tears are flowing, they feel connected, they feel like, and we're kind of like letting that shit out.
Right.
And so I think the mechanism in therapy is very similar in some ways. I think the big difference is there's different aspects about the psychology and neuroscience of things like surrender and spirituality.
Okay.
But I think that you have a human who's sort of showing you through it.
Yes.
That's one thing. The other two things, you want to respond to that, or I've got two other things I wanted to share.
I just want to quickly say, like, I think a lot of crying can be self-pity and self-loathing and serving the self, like feeling bad about yourself and blaming. Like, when a lot of people cry, they do it because they're like, why me? Why this? I don't deserve this. It's a very selfish act. But
I don't think that that's true. I don't think that it's a very inherently selfish act to cry where people are always just having a pity party for themselves. I think that in a lot of instances, people are crying to just get their emotions out so that they can move forward. Because sometimes you just need to almost emotionally, I guess you could say even emotionally exhaust the body before you can move forward in a more productive capacity. But I wouldn't say that most people just cry to be pitying. Like, I don't think that that's true. I don't think that Sneako has a good relationship with crying. I don't either, but like my wife will cry. It's just to express her frustrations, and then she'll stop, and then she'll be productive. I don't think that everybody cries like in this way. I don't think that he's correct about this.
One of the most consistent things that I do for my patients is stop that cycle. I completely agree. Mm-hmm. I think that we see an overwhelming amount of what I would call emotional masturbation.
Okay.
That is guised as like support
as progress.
places.
Yes.
I mean, there are places that people will go and essentially emotionally vomit over and over and over again, but over time it doesn't get better. Mm-hmm. So the whole point of like processing emotions is to be done with them, not to repeat that cycle over and over again. And I've had my fair share of people who are way too indulgent with self-pity. But I would argue that that's the same problem in a different way, but it's the same problem as all the others that I've said, including things like PTSD, which is that their inappropriate emotional reaction or the emotions that they've lost control of are self-pity. Mm-hmm. So I one time had a patient who, like, this was early on before I became a really competent therapist, and would come in and after they were complaining about being depressed, and 6 months later, like, they came in, they had the same fucking complaints. And I was like, are you getting better by coming here? And he's like, no. And I was like, what are we doing? And he's like, I don't know. I thought this is what we're supposed to do. Isn't therapy like coming here and I just tell you about what's like wrong with my day, and then I just tell you everything that's wrong in my life? And I'm like, is that actually helping?
That's my problem.
And he's like, no.
That's it.
No, it's not. And then I was like, well, then what the fuck are we gonna do about it? Right? And then we started. Then the real therapy started. But I'm with anyway. So I think that there's value to therapy that I would say that your understanding of is incomplete, right? And if I was trying to convince you, it's simply that you haven't tried it. I don't disagree with some of the judgments that you make, but I would still say that those are judgments that you're making, like listening to a tiny slice of the population. Like people who are transgender who go to therapy account for less than, I'm pretty sure about this. I don't know this. I don't have the statistics right in hand, but I guess that they're less than 1% of patients. 99% of people who go to therapy, definitely 95%. If not more realistically, I think gender dysphoria and stuff, it probably counts for about 1% is my gut. Maybe 2% or 3%. But the vast majority of people don't go for stuff like that. The last thing that I want to say is that in my experience as a therapist, achievement becomes way easier once people have gone through therapy. So I work with a lot of people who are executives, people who are not the demographic that you're describing. So people who are at the top end of net worth, like billionaires. And these are people who have built gigantic companies from the ground up. And their experience in therapy is that it helps to take care of this emotional shit. It's just about learning about this dimension of like self-understanding. And frequently I'll teach
I mean, it makes sense to have a healthy way to process your emotions and make you a more effective leader in general. Or else you start taking those emotions out onto other people. I mean, I guess that's their relationship with that, is that they don't want emotional overload. They probably have an emotional overload in some capacity, and they're looking to talk to like a therapist to help them reduce that so they don't take it out on their people, so to speak. I mean, that makes sense.
Meditate and all that kind of stuff too. But whether it's like
what about Booger? What about Boogie? He might be addicted to self-pity. It's quite possible.
Or streamers, or
it would be an interesting conversation to see Dr. K talk to Boogie. Truly, I think it would be very interesting, except for the fact that I don't think that Boogie is honest enough to have a legitimate conversation about his mental health. He either has an understanding of what's wrong with him, or he has an idea. He just knows how to say what people want to hear because he's constantly baiting people for money and attention and for opportunities he doesn't deserve. And so going on Dr. K, he seems like the kind of guy who would just go on there and go, hey guys, I know what's wrong with me, have a performance, and then it would kind of end unproductively. That's what we saw with Caleb Hammer's conversation. And then he would just start talking shit about Dr. K, of course. So I don't think it would be productive for him to do this. It would be a pure, it would be for him to just try to get his like name out there more and get into more circles, which I guess he could do, but.
Or just ordinary kids who are 24 years old and haven't done shit with their life, whatever the case is. In my experience, that people usually get a lot better. They learn about themselves. They learn about things like their emotions and their thoughts, their desires, their impulses, and they get better at controlling all of that, and then they get better at life.
Okay. But what do you want? Do you have a son?
No.
You saying that all now? I would prefer that my son never even have to get to that position. He'd be strong enough to avoid that all. That's fine.
Sure, but if you would want your son to be able to get to a position to not do that, you would probably want to make sure he was like mentally healthy, right? So like, let's say, like, I don't want my kids to be fat. Truthfully, I don't want them to be fat. I don't want them to be lazy. You know, I want them to work hard. School was very easy for me. I never studied, never learned to study, and I think that that's probably made me overall kind of like lazier than I should be as a productive human being, we'll say. And so I say this because like I would want to correct those issues, and like therapy could be a way to go. You know, I don't know if I would need it, but you understand what my point is, right?
That's my point. Is that it can help people, but you need men that don't need it at all.
Okay, so this is the other thing that I think is incomplete. You're using the word need. I would say that at least 50% of my patients don't need therapy.
So why do they go?
For optimization, to master themselves.
Okay.
To learn more about themselves from an expert who spent 7 years studying to become a monk and meditating in the Himalayas, and then 8 years becoming a medical doctor, psychiatrist, neuroscience researcher, an expert in the mind and the body. And you go and you learn from that person about how you work. When you have the impulse that you want to do anything, whether it be scratch an itch, piss, smoke, make a joke.
Right. Isn't it funny? Like, you're kind of agreeing with me. You're saying that because you're a monk and because you've connected with something spiritually, they're looking for some sort of guidance from you. Isn't the ultimate form of that guidance just talking to God? If I pray, that's like quicker. It's almost the same thing, but just I see prayer as a better vessel for that. It's simpler.
Yeah,
I mean, it's, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but like, is it, you see it as that, and that might be true, but like, I would imagine statistically, it's probably not the case, right? Probably the case that actually going to a therapist is probably more effective than, you know, just praying to God. But okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this several times, and I'll say it again. I'm not disagreeing with most of what you say, Sneako. I've never said that prayer is not good or is not incredibly effective. My issue is one of probability and population. So I'll be the first to, I even said in my own experience, spirituality has helped me way more than psychotherapy. But people are different. And there are some people who come to me who spirituality benefits a lot. And there are other people that we sort of alluded to this at the beginning. We can get into more if you want, but there's some people for whom faith is hard. There's some people for whom they don't hear God's voice. Sure. And it is a very dangerous assumption because this is an unfalsifiable hypothesis, right? So if I say you're not trying hard enough, that's why you don't hear God's voice. You can never disprove that. So let's say that there's one human being on the planet who it's impossible to hear God's voice. We would never be able to detect that, right? They could be trying 100%, they could be doing everything right, but it's possible that this person will never hear it.
That's true. I mean, then you also...
Disagree. I think it's possible.
But this, it's not really something to disagree with. You can't really disagree with that. But here's the thing: is that different people, like again, we have different form of like priests or faith leaders to interpret your God's word better because they're better at it. And so, what if you're struggling to interpret God's word or to hear God's word in the first place? And so, what you're doing is that out of a shame or an embarrassment, instead of seeking out help, you're kind of just sitting there and going, "No, I hear him too." And you're having incorrect interpretations of God's word. These are the problems with like interacting with just like, well, just pray. We'll just pray. Well, it's like, okay, go for it, but also you might need other methods. So
for everyone, but I see what you're saying.
Right, but I mean, you're allowed to think that, but you don't know that. You can have faith in that, sure. So I also, for the record, agree with you, which is, you know, I agree with you that I think everyone can hear God's voice. But I can also say that just because I believe that doesn't make it true. In fact, what we know about truth is to a certain degree internal, but we also know that there's plenty of data that, for example, you know, religiosity is protective in some ways, but we also know that like people, actually, do we know that? Let me think about that. We also know that, let's talk about men, for example, that like men still kill themselves at an alarming rate. And we don't have great evidence that exercise is sufficient to protect against suicidality.
But don't you see, isn't there a correlation between the amount of people, how much we are talking about mental health and the rise in suicide in men? More people are going to therapy than ever. Mental health is being talked about more than ever. And also
the correlation, listen, the correlation doesn't mean that it's the cause of the thing. Okay, so for the most part, I don't think that suicides are overall rising. Outside of like COVID. Here's the thing. Let's say that it is. I think it's really interesting to blame therapy for suicide increase instead of economic instability. A hyper focus on the computer and technologies that removes you from talking to other people or makes it less necessary. I think that these two things are massively bigger. So to have this idea that it's most likely the therapy that's the problem, I think it's just ignorant. I think that's just ignorant. It's just a silly thing to say.
Suicide rate is never been higher.
So what does a correlation mean to you?
A correlation means that maybe a correlation is when two things are consistent with each other.
Yeah, so the question is, are we talking more about mental health because people are more suicidal than ever? Or are people more suicidal than ever because we're talking too much about mental health?
I think both things can be true.
Yeah, so that's what a correlation is, right? There isn't a clear causation. Now, the interesting thing about suicidality is that the suicide rate is higher than it's ever been, but not by much. The really shocking thing, and this is what's really interesting, is that suicidality, especially in men, has been relatively constant. It's going up a little bit, but it is not actually correlated with the rise in mental illness. There's even one study that I was looking at recently that suggested that 50% of men who kill themselves have no evidence or history of mental illness, which for the record, I kind of buy. So I think a lot of men that kill themselves, and this is also like as a professional, there's a difference between someone coming into my office and who's suicidal because their mind is not functioning correctly. This is mental illness. It is a pathology. Their thoughts are warped. Okay, does that make sense? That's what we mean by illness. It's not functioning properly. But I'd say that half the men that come into my office, the reason they're suicidal is not because their mind is misfunctioning. It's because it's functioning very well. And they played the tape through to the end. And their genuine assessment of their circumstances makes it so that staying alive is not as good of an option as just ending it. That's what really scares me the most, is I think a lot of men kill themselves who are not mentally ill. They're just, life doesn't offer them anything.
I mean, that kind of goes along with what I'm saying before, of being like, we're economically deficient in some capacity. And because of that, you know, people in general, I think people will have a tremendously higher value in life if they do something that gives them that value. And usually that's working. It makes you kind of work for something. It gives you a value in your life. I think working can be is a very positive thing. It's an outlet. It gives you money. It also gives you like some kind of a value. And so if you don't have these things, then like, yeah, I would see that like that could absolutely be a tremendous problem as well. And again, not having, you know, the economic means to engage with some things would cause that problem. No?
Life doesn't offer them anything because they're not working towards something. I think that's the best way to avoid depression, is to be occupied with what you're doing so much you don't have time.
Sure, and then as we live in a society that offers you less bang for your buck, literally, that starts to go away, right? So that would be the bigger thing, right, than anything else. You know, I don't think everybody's going to be content just being a McDonald's worker, making, you know, less than enough money to live or survive. I think people would be much better off if we had a better, more constructive society to exist in. So.
About it. A lot of this mental health crisis is due to the fact that people are inactive, they're lethargic, they're lazy, and they're living internally instead of externally.
Yeah. So once again, I think this is like where I think I disagree with some, agree with some. So I completely agree with you that a contributor to the mental health crisis, and now we're getting into the polemic because we're talking about agree and disagree, but is because of inactivity. Completely agree. But I think the first part of what you said is spoken like in terms of people can work out and conquer depression. I think there's a subgroup of people that can, but that really is a statement made by someone who I don't think has been clinically depressed. Because if you really look and you talk to these people, I would argue that someone who's clinically depressed actually works way harder and puts forth a lot more effort than someone who's not depressed. The difference is they just get very little out of it. So like think about the hardest thing that you've had to do, and what would your life be like if getting out of bed was that hard?
Interesting.
So the scale of difficulty of people.
So I guess he's talking about relative effort. So like for me, getting out of bed is easy. I got piss. Diabetes. For somebody who's depressed, that might be like a tremendous amount of like stress or energy just to get out of bed. And so like that's, you know, comparatively more difficult than other things that people are doing. Interesting.
Like clinically depressed is that everything is like very difficult. Everything's a rate loss.
I think it's just a belief. Like saying that if you believe that it's very difficult to get up, then it's going to be very difficult. But if you don't even have that as a possibility in your mind, then that's not going to be a problem. If you believe, like,
yeah, I think that Sneako just fundamentally lacks the ability to empathize with people, or engage. I think that Sneako fundamentally lacks the ability to engage in true empathy. I think he obviously can be empathetic to other people that are like-minded, but I don't think that he has an ability to engage in like true empathy. Like for instance, when it comes to like trans people, I don't fucking get it. I really don't get it. I felt a little self-conscious before, but I've never had this like deep-seated issue when it comes to me feeling like a man, you know, whatever. But also I'm a very masculine man who's, you know, never, my masculinity has never been questioned. I don't have these like deep kind of issues that I'm focusing or working through. And so the point that I'm making is like I don't get it, but like I get it enough to be like, oh, okay, like you're going through some kind of experience, and that's valid, generally speaking. That's it. You know, so that's true empathy. True empathy is being able to empathize with people that like you don't have as many connections with. Whereas just I mean, this is in my opinion, but like regular empathy is like, yeah, I understand what you're going through because I've gone through that, which I guess is what empathy is. But you know,
I'm clinically depressed. I have a difficult time waking up. Guess what's gonna happen?
So Sneako, that's not how it works.
I'm just gonna wake
So
up.
people don't think I'm clinically depressed. People resist it for a long time. I would even say probably 50% of people who are clinically depressed don't even realize they're depressed. They just think life is really, really hard. They're not even aware. There's a huge underdiagnosis problem.
Damn.
So it's just life becomes.
Do you give these people meds?
Well, I mean, sometimes I guess it depends on what's going on. Sometimes I can rebalance the brain, and sometimes maybe they don't need medication.
You doing an SSRIs?
Sometimes. So I would say that my personal prescribing pattern is 25% of my patients are on medication. If I prescribe medication, it depends on the patient. If I prescribe medication, I would say that 70 to 80% of people that I prescribe medication for will be off of medication within 12 to 18 months. So I think medicine is a tool, just like anything else. I don't think that antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication fix anything, but they make your life easier as long as you take the pill. Easier in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like I'm on like insulin and other medications. The idea isn't to stay on them forever. I mean, I have to get my shit together and get like healthier to get off of them. So you usually go on medication to get off them, because when I wasn't on them, I was like I had like no energy, because you're unhealthy and your body's struggling to exist. And so that should be the main idea of a medication, is to get off of it at some point. Yeah, sure.
Difficult than others.
Yeah, that's why I think it goes back to belief, because you have to accept that life is always going to be difficult. It's not supposed to be easy. It's going to be hard.
Who said that? Hold on a second. I don't agree with that.
You're saying that giving the medication makes their lives easier.
No, I don't say medication, but I'm saying that I don't agree with you that life is supposed to be hard. I think life is supposed to be easy.
Really?
Yeah, my life is easy. Is your life hard?
I would say my life is difficult, yeah. I mean, no, compared to a lot of people now, I live in the first world, make a lot of money.
I mean, forget about comparison. Is your experience of life that it's harder?
Yeah, there's difficult things that I go through every single day, every day.
Doubtful. I doubt that his life is that hard. I don't think that he really thinks that. But anyway, like, no, my life is fairly easy. So like, yeah, I don't think life is supposed to be hard. You should be prepared for difficulty. I am prepared for that. If it comes out there, I have no problem adjusting. But it's not supposed to be hard. It's not supposed to be a fucking drag and kick your ass. I don't believe in that at all. I think Sneako has this idea of what life is supposed to be, and so he's going to perform as if he is experiencing that difficulty in life. That's much my opinion. Could be wrong, but
aren't you tired of that?
But no, I enjoy conquering. I enjoy difficult situations. I enjoy solving the puzzle. That's what makes life worth it. Is the everyday struggle. If you can't accept that, then you're gonna become depressed. If you think that I think if people believe that it's supposed to be easy, that's when they fall into depression. If you can't accept the fact that you need to work, then you're gonna of course you're gonna cry.
So let me ask you a different question. Would you say that you suffer on a daily basis?
Suffer? No, I wouldn't say suffer, because I've seen suffering.
I mean, I think my life is pretty easy. I think there's a language issue here, like a semantic issue, but I think that, and it sounds to me like you rather enjoy the difficulty of life.
That's a better way to deal with it. For example, my dad's from Haiti, and from a very young age, I always saw some of the worst poverty the world has ever seen. Haiti's one of the poorest countries in the world, and they don't go to therapy there. They don't get the suicide rate is very low.
Did he live in Haiti, or?
The suicide rate is higher in first world countries, where people get to talk about their feelings more, and when people
I think that's more of a display of information. I think that's another thing I should have talked about before. But it's one of those things where it's like, one of the reasons we're so depressed too is that we're constantly having information blast into our brain through social media or through your phone, through the internet, that is distressing you. So year after year, overall, everything's safer and better for us than it's ever been before. But you wouldn't think that if you're constantly looking at information that tells you that there's a death halfway across the world. This person died. This person went outside, went for a walk. They were stabbed to death. This person farted, their asshole fell through their balls. This person ate a Cheerio and their head exploded. You're hearing all this information that's blasting into you, making you super self-conscious, making you super afraid, making you super just self-aware in a toxic way. And so that's going to distress people. So if you live in a poor country with no internet, you're probably not going to constantly getting this feed of information into you. Also, if you live in a poor country, you're probably not that intelligent. And I don't say that in a way of like, wow, you're a fucking shitty. The difference between intelligence of like a first world country and a third world country is simply the access of the ability to become intelligent, right? Like I wouldn't be intelligent if I didn't have access to good schooling. And so the more intelligent you are, the more self-aware you are, the different relationship that you have with different things where you're parsing through information and your brain is more active, at least in my opinion. And you're constantly thinking. I've worked with people that were not particularly smart, and for some reason they can just stand still and stare out into the open and time will just pass them by and they don't have to think. But I feel like my brain constantly has to be occupied in this way where if I'm not doing, like, I'm almost always present all the time. And it can be distressing. I think that there's a culmination of different factors, and hopefully I didn't say anything in an insensitive way, that are going to make you more distressed as a person. Addiction to social media is another thing too. If you're addicted to social media, you're addicted to seeing all these negative things, right? So if you're in a third world country that has more poverty, that has different or more hardship, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not necessarily getting this constant feed of the worst things that are ever happening. And yeah, no, there's no way. No, this Sneako didn't grow up in Haiti. It's weird. He's like, my dad grew up in Haiti. I've never been there, or I went there for like a week once, and it's so bad. It's like, he has this pattern of I think trying to over-identify with things. Like before, he's like, I went to school and I saw all these gender affirming care in school. You didn't. That was you were having in school in 7 years. You're fucking full of shit, right? So, or he's like, but he's like, I live in New York, and so like I talk to people all the time about therapy, about all these liberals talking about therapy in this toxic way. It doesn't matter where you live; you're consuming this information online. So he said, like, he's constantly over-identifying with different things, and even though he doesn't actually have direct relationships with whatever information he's engaging with. And in fact, Sneako is an example of what is like almost proof of what I was talking about. Sneako's getting information blasted into his head most of it is like trans people thinking that this is the most incredible, prolific issue in his entire life. Is holy fuck, there's so many of these fucking blue-haired trans liberal blah blah. They're like less than 1% of people in therapy, right? He thinks that they're so prevalent, and this is part of it. It's just he is the terminally online person who is proof of this. The difference is just that it's manifested in him in a different way than other people. Some people will parse through the danger online information. It depends on what they're getting consumed, what they're consuming. If you're somebody that's constantly consuming death and destruction, you're going to have an issue with that. If you're somebody that's constantly consuming liberals, you're going to have an issue with that. If you're somebody who's constantly absorbing conservatives, you might have an issue with that. He's seeing what you consider the worst of any particular group, and it's invading his head, and it's almost like a psyop for him, making him think that that's how the world is, but it's not. It's too much media in general is what's like significantly distressing people. That's the problem. But Sneako, he just doesn't understand that he has the same issue as everybody else. He's a victim to the content that he's engaging with, even though the issues he thinks are prevalent in the society are just not existent to the way that to the degree that he thinks that they are. That's what it really comes down to
think about what they think and how they feel and how it should be better. But the suicide rate is lower, even though there's more poverty, and it's because they don't even, that idea that life is supposed to be easy doesn't exist. They've all accepted that it's difficult, and they find enjoyment anyway.
So there's a couple of things. So that's Sneako, it's really interesting to talk to you because I don't think you're wrong. Once again, I think it's incomplete. So there are a couple of things to consider. One is, how is suicide rate in Haiti measured?
No, I don't know.
That's actually a good question too. I didn't even think of that. How robust is like any statistical analysis or acquisition in another country that doesn't have the resources to do so? Yeah, good question. I didn't even think about that.
I don't know.
Right, so
I know that's not a thing there. I know that like the average, there's no like therapy system. There's not this in Haiti.
Yeah, so if you don't have so when someone dies, anyway, so there are a couple things to understand. One is in developing countries like Haiti. One thing you've got to be super careful about is that suicides are not cataloged as suicides because they don't have an infrastructure to detect suicide.
It's anecdotal evidence. I'm saying, like, I know people talk to people, and I would vouch for the fact that Haitians, if there's any, well, they would probably say that they don't know anybody who's like, that's not really real there. They don't talk about that. It doesn't.
Okay, so it might just be more of a taboo in that culture. So what he's saying is just not proof.
Yeah. But everybody in America, everybody in the West knows somebody who's killed themselves or threatens to kill themselves. People cut the risk.
And you're not wrong that. So I think there's a caveat there. It's not quite as black and white, but I would also agree that, and I think we sort of have evidence for this, that the better society becomes, the worse our mental health becomes. So the more that we become, the more that our physical needs get met, the worse our mind will become.
Strong men make easy times, hard times make strong men, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so I think it's strong men make easy times make weak men make hard times.
And we are in the easy times have made weak men, period.
Yeah, so I don't quite agree with that because I think that there's also like a level of evolution where the difficulties that we face have changed, right? So the way that I see that is like we had to fight for survival and now we have to fight for contentment. It's just the enemy we're facing is different. So we used to die from things like infections, but like thank God for antibiotics. And now the crisis that we're dealing with because we've sort of fixed everything else. So it's really interesting because if you really look at it, every dimension of medicine has gotten better over the last 50 years except for mental health. Mental health is the only one place where we're losing the war.
Interesting.
And it's because we have so much time to think about it. We've never had more time to focus on it.
What? I think it's because it's very mental health. I don't know that it's an objective science. Like you can cut somebody open and look at their heart and go, "There's too much fucking shit in there." You can't really cut somebody's head open and go like, "What the fuck's going on?" Maybe I'm wrong, but brain science is so complicated and so difficult and just so hard to understand. And I think it's because you can't just open somebody's head up and go like, "What's in here and how do we change this?" Because we could. I mean, we give lobotomies, it changes somebody's personality. But we don't know how to do it in an effective way that has like a positive outcome. So like mental health science is more difficult in general just because you can't cut it open. You can't do something, we used to think that you could open somebody up, take their liver out and go like, oh, they're going to have a different change. We're going to remove the toxins. So it's so difficult to engage with mental health. That's why it's really just going to be cause and effect, like, trial and error. It's not the same thing as other things. It's just not. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, so I think that we have more idle minds than we've ever had. Interestingly enough, if you look at our society, we have the least time to process that we've ever had in the history of humanity. So, because if you think about the way that people used to live, like we used to be like, let's say, hunter-gatherers or farmers, so we had a lot of rote activity with mental time that was free. So our minds were free most of the time.
Yeah, now, like if your cholesterol's high, it'll show that. Yeah.
Our minds are occupied most of the time. So for example, like let's say we went out and hunted, right? And I shoot an arrow.
And I imagine that there's going to be a relationship with some things. Like if you have a particularly high or low hormone or release of a particular, thing, I don't know, endorphins or something, you can monitor and measure that. But it's just such an incomplete thing.
I miss the deer. And then you shoot an arrow and you hit the deer. And then I feel bad about it because, man, Sneako's he's so Chad and I'm so beta or whatever. And then what happens is we carry this deer for 2 hours back. And then I have plenty of time to process on that 2 hours, like my feeling of inferiority. And so if you look at like hunter-gatherers and stuff, like they've just got a lot of time to mentally work through whatever goes on. Now what's going on is our minds are so distracted usually with technology that we have no time left for processing. And now we have studies that show if you fucking go for a walk where there are trees, it's like good for your mental health. Like we know that. Is some of it vitamin D? Sure, but some of it is just processing time. We don't have any time to process. This is why a lot of people, like what happens is they're so technologically occupied. And then when they go to sleep at night, the thoughts come flooding back. All of the things that they built up, everything that they've suppressed, everything that they've shoved down comes flooding back, and then they can't sleep. Then they've got insomnia, and then they'll use a CBD, whatever, or like drink or whatever, or they'll wait till they're so fucking fatigued that they absolutely pass out because they can't go to bed.
Do we agree on? Seems like we agree.
Yeah.
I think that what he just said was a little beyond Sneako, not in a way that he can never comprehend it, but I think that. Like, it's probably, I feel like, I mean, to Sneako's credit, he's talking to somebody that's very clearly disagrees with him about a lot of stuff. But I think that this is just such a different concept for him that he's just not going to get it until he gets it. You know, sometimes there's information that you are confronted with and it'll take you a while to process it and go like, oh, you know, sometimes you're just taking a fat shit and you're like, wait a minute, this guy said something 6 months ago and it really resonates with me now. Like I had that moment with like Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was having a conversation with us. I always talk about this, but it was such an interesting moment in my life. It's one of the most recent ones where I had almost an epiphany, where he was talking to Ben Shapiro and they were talking about trans people. And one of the things that he said was like, why are you bringing up this fact? I don't remember what the fact was. And I was like, because it's a fact, idiot. But then I started to realize like, oh no, it's a potential weaponization of a fact. I don't remember the specifics, but like, let's say, I'm trying to think of one. I'm trying to think of something decent that's not like edgy or anything. Sure, let's say like trans people. So it's categorized in the DSM-5, like gender dysphoria is in the DSM-5, right? And so how do you acknowledge that fact? Well, if you're somebody who's transphobic, you might say, well, trans people are fucking crazy. They have a mental illness. And so like because of that, they don't deserve rights. It's all in their head, blah, blah, blah. So we acknowledge the fact that it is classified as some form of a mental illness. But what you're doing is you're throwing some stank on it to try to be oppressive or dismissive of their actual issues that they're going through. Whereas I could use the same fact, like, yeah, there is a mental illness there, but like everybody has different mental. I have ADHD. I also am in the DSM-5. It doesn't make me less valid as a person. It doesn't make my experiences less valid, and we acknowledge it as a society the way that we are supposed to treat things. Is based on your ability to function in that society better without having to like catastrophically change society. So for like ADHD, I might need like a behavioral protocol for class or some kind of an IEP, I think it's called, like an educational protocol, IEP, or some kind of medication or some kind of behavioral therapy. Where for like the same thing for a trans person, like obviously you're not going to make drastic concessions, but like, oh, like what support you getting? Well, you know, we will just call you by the proper pronoun, and here's some medication that helps. You know, it's really not huge. And it was like, okay, that's what it comes down to. That's what I'm talking about here. So like maybe in 6 months, Sneako will be taking the fat shit, and he's like, oh wait, Dr. Ket, you know, he'll have this like epiphany moment, and all the information will just kind of make sense. It's just like a small trigger of something happening.
It's also that weird polemic that we're slipping into, where it's like, do we agree or disagree? I don't know how we keep on getting here, but I think it's something about the way that you speak triggers that in me.
Yeah, I guess it's a pretty like aggressive way of speaking.
Yeah, but I don't think you're aggressive. There's something subtle about it. I'm still trying to figure it out.
What were you going to say earlier? Remember you were going to uncover something like an hour ago, and you laughed and said, "I'll tell you later." What was it?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, but I mean, so you actually got there pretty quick. This whole thing about like, so I don't know if this kind of makes sense to you, but being noticed is very important for you. That's why you like it. You like being seen. You love being seen.
Okay.
Right, and you kind of jumped right into it because you said like, yeah, I felt invisible, like, and so this is what I would encourage you to really think about is if you pay attention to yourself, you'll find that.
It's very interesting because I don't like. It's so interesting because I really don't care about being seen. Yeah, I need an eating protocol, not just for the amount of food I eat, more than for the way I eat. I fucking choke my food all the time. It's insane. I think I need to chew better. I'm like Bevo. For me, I've always been. I think that I don't know. I feel like the desire for Sneako maybe comes from like him in school not being seen in a way that like he wishes he was. For me, I've never been invisible. I'm a very big person. I'm 6'4". I'm very tall. I speak very deeply, and I generally will like command like attention when I'm in a room. And so a lot of times I like to not be seen. Like I notice people looking at me and sometimes feeling uncomfortable around me. And sometimes I'll cross the street to avoid people, to not make them uncomfortable. You know, there might be a woman, it might be like a person of color, because I just don't want to be next to them. But no, I'm just kidding. But that's like a struggle that I deal with. Is I'm too visible. I feel like I'm too visible. Yeah.
I think God will help with this, by the way. So I totally see why. I totally see. I think it fits with my understanding of you why religion is so potent for you. But I think I think you really like to be noticed, and I think you actually like to play games with people, and it makes you very happy when they're able to see through it. And then I would also venture that you don't like it when they see some things that you're not proud of. And the beautiful thing about God is that it's okay for God to see those things, right? Because there's no ego with God, but with other human beings there's ego.
Yes.
To which I would say this is my perspective. Okay, I'm not saying I'm right here. I feel like I'm right about a lot of things about psychotherapy and whatnot, but this is my opinion. I believe it a lot. But so here's the thing. So you're saying that the joy comes from God, right? And God is special because with God you're egoless, and without your ego you can surrender to God, and then it feels amazing, right?
Yes.
So one thing I would encourage you to think about is what is responsible for all of that goodness. Is the key thing the surrender of ego, or is it God?
It's God.
So the cool thing, so I would disagree. I think God is really good at getting you to surrender your ego, but I would say that surrendering your ego is going to have the effect. God is just a really good way to do that. And if you can surrender your ego even with another human being, it's fucking liberating, man. It feels amazing.
Right, but it's almost impossible to do that.
No, it isn't.
It depends on the person. Like, I feel like I'm decent at surrendering my ego to an extent. I mean, we all have an ego, and sometimes, you know, it exists, but I don't need God for that. Or maybe my learning of God, I don't know, maybe I do. I don't know.
That's why people like therapy, because they go there and it's a place where they can surrender their ego, and they have someone who helps them see that. I'm not trying to convince you to go to therapy, but I think that almost impossible is like, it's like kind of saying like it's almost impossible to fly. Well, yeah, if you don't know how to build a plane. I agree. But there are literally techniques, and even if you look at Islam and Mecca and things like that, and you know all these rituals they come up with are all physiologically and psychologically priming you for surrender, to clean yourself, to wear white. They figured this stuff out, man. That ain't random. Someone sat down and realized, okay, when I wash myself before I go into a temple, my capacity for surrender increases. It becomes easier to surrender.
That's interesting. I feel like that looking at it like that is just super interesting. Because we know that if let's say you feel clean, or your environment is clean, you will feel better about existing in your environment. There's statistics, like if you go to a place that looks really nice, you have a higher chance of actually acting nice or respecting that space. And so like this, like, yeah, be in pure white. I don't think that the whiteness necessarily matters, but like be clean, wash yourself before you pray. There's like, I have at least me, I have a different relationship with the world if I shower, I feel better. And then I have I have the capacity to just interact better. And so that is interesting, like where that would come from. If like, wash yourself first, because like that's gonna make you feel better.
Right.
Like part of
religion.
And
so the interesting thing is, in my experience, it's the surrender itself that leads to the awesomeness. And God is just very easy to surrender to, because there's not an ego on the other side of the table. Right? It's hard to surrender when there's an ego on the other side. Harder, completely agree. And the challenge is that not everyone can feel God the way that you can.
Everyone can. I know you're saying that there's too many generalizations, but everyone can. And it's where I also disagree is just saying that it's all has to do with faith. I think there's a lot of logic that comes around God. It's not just faith. It's also scientific.
I think,
like, I don't know. I mean, if it makes sense to you, like, God bless, frankly. But like there is, like, again, like I don't think there's anything really scientific about God. I think that is the point of God. You know, it's completely faith-based, like we established before. You know, faith is effectively necessary in the absence of science, in the absence of some forms of logic. Some faith teachings can be logical, but that doesn't mean that the faith itself is logical, right? So
I think that there's a lot of logic when it comes to God too. I don't think it's just faith. I think faith seems to be, especially for the Abrahamic religions, faith seems to be the central piece of it. That's my understanding as an outsider. I would say that faith appears to be more important than logic. I don't know if you're the one who's Islamic, so you tell me. Or Muslim.
Right, but I wouldn't be able to, well, this is my personal experience, I wouldn't be able to find faith without first logically coming to the fact that God created everything. First, I have to understand that there has to be one intelligent.
Right, but there is no logical. I mean, it makes sense to you. That's great, but I don't care about this.
Designer, that we can't exist without God. That we're all the concept of oneness, that there's one creator, and we're all he created the universe. So arriving there logically, then help me find faith.
Yeah. So I think that's oftentimes many people's experience, is that they have some kind of intellectual. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Like an intellectual comfort sounds too small. Like an intellectual realization, and then that sort of forms faith. Yeah.
Like an intellectual epiphany would probably.
Soon. I think I usually talk to people for between an hour and 2. And so we're coming up on 2 hours. Do you have other thoughts or questions?
No, I think this is a good discussion. I think this is an interesting conversation.
Did I satisfy your you had asked a question about what I understood about that it being invisible and being noticed and stuff? Did I answer that? I know I was being playful about it earlier, but I don't want to leave you hanging there.
I think it's less about being noticed, but also it's an innate desire to, I want to inspire and I like connecting with people. It's not really like a look at me thing. It's more that I want to be sure that I have a positive impact on the world. That there's something
Where does that come from?
I thought this was the last fucking round of the goddamn game, dude.
I don't know. I think it's a universal, I think it's a masculine imperative.
So this is what's so interesting to me is why are you so quick? And it's not an accusation. I'm really curious. Like, why are you so quick to say your experience is universal?
Because I don't think I'm different from most people. I think a lot of people I think men are all the same and women are all the same to an extent. Like we all have the same sort of wants and needs. I think deep down we're way more similar than people give us credit for.
Yeah, people are incredibly similar, but this is the thing. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how I want to talk about this. As individuals, we are incredibly similar. We have a lot of the same, but like we have a lot of similar thoughts, feelings, experiences. And I think just like that, all of us have a similar hole in our body that needs to be filled with something philosophical, maybe is the word for it, or spiritual. And for some people, that can be religion. For other people, that could be some form of science. For me, it's probably a lot to do with like what it means to be like a man or an effective or a good man, right? Everybody has a different philosophical aspect, and because part of it is filled by God, because like I grew up very religious, but for me, like I'll operate based on that. Like those are my principles. Maybe that's what it is. Everybody needs like a principled moral anchor. And we all need a moral anchor, but different things will make sense to different people. So for Sneako, his moral anchor is being Muslim. For me, it's like, what does it mean to be a good man? For you, it might be Christianity or Judaism, or, you know, these are different things. I think, but like that doesn't mean that everybody's going to have the same relationship with that moral anchor. And Sneako just happens to have, this is his relationship. Like this, we're all very similar, and I think this can fill it. Not necessarily, because like, being Islamic and being Christian, they're not that different. You think it is, but it's not that different. Being Jewish, not that different. These are not massively different things, but they're a different flavor of effectively like a similar concept. The concept of like one creator who has an objective morality in a book, even though, again, the book is not really objective morality, at least not the Jewish or Christian text, which we talked about earlier. Right? So like it's basically just like, do you like blue Gatorade or red Gatorade? You know what I mean? Like, which one do you prefer? Or maybe you like Arizona iced tea instead, right? That's what we're talking about. But like, yeah, he's not unique. I'm not unique. You know, we all can be different, but we're overall very much similar. We're all very much the same. But different prescriptions of moral anchor is what we need. But it's not going to be the same for everybody. And especially for a religion, if you can't, or anything really, but especially for religion, if you can't buy into it, then it will not be effective. If you can't buy into the religion of Islam, it won't be effective. If you can't buy into Judaism, it's not going to be effective. You can't buy into Christianity. You like blue? Very good. And so for me, it's very difficult too, especially with a lot of these religions are used to be oppressive to gay and trans people. But I can buy into the concept of like being a man, right? So yeah, your values. Maybe that's pretty much, I could have just said your different values. But at the end of the day, it's all very similar. So.
Okay. I think a lot of people like to feel as if they're unique. I think a lot of people go to therapy to think that their individual experience is special. And I think we need to remove that idea that we're all special, because we're not. You know, we're all God's creation, and we're not that different. You know, there's nothing that really separates me from anybody, from you or anybody watching this right now. I don't think we're that different. And I think the best thing we can do with our time is to create and inspire.
I think I figured out why this becomes polemic so quickly. So you do speak in very declarative statements that seem, they don't offer a whole lot of wiggle room. So I think it invites other people to disagree with you, because you don't have a statement that's like 95% in one direction. Everything's 100%.
That's true.
So and I think unless someone agrees with you 100%, it naturally invites the discrepancy. Right? So if I say like all people are X, it's very easy for people to come back and say, no, they aren't. But if I say some people are X, it doesn't invite, it's less inviting for disagreement. But it's okay. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, what I would encourage for you, if that's okay, can I offer you some things to think about?
Sure.
The first is, do you like, I know you talk to a lot of people, and you seem actually quite open-minded to me. Is that fair?
Yeah, I agree.
But what I'm kind of curious about is you don't, the way that you talk, so I'm a little bit confused, because on the one hand you seem quite open-minded. So even, not debating, but you know, at the very beginning you're like, therapy doesn't work for anyone. And then like later on you're able to see, okay, I can understand how it could be useful for some people, but I still think prayer is more effective, which is completely fair, right? But you're not actually very rigid with your thinking. Either a lot of declarative statements, a lot of, I would say, inflammatory statements, a lot of like lack of like empathy, which I think upsets a lot of people, right? Because you don't really what you believe is like universally true is what I am really getting a lot of from you. So what I'm kind of curious about is you seem open-minded, but do you like listen to other people?
I do quite a bit. I think I listen to people.
Well, do you absorb the teachings of other people? I think is kind of a better question.
More than most.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, I had an interview series in New York called The Woman Podcast where I just would set up a table in the subway station and talk to people and just look at them and listen. I think I've talked.
Sure, but like, and the question is, did you really listen, or did you go there with a narrative to push, right? And this is a problem I have with a lot of these like on the street style things where people will go to a place and it doesn't matter if you're progressive, conservative, whatever, and they're looking for an answer, and they go there and they find, you're gonna find what you're looking for. Of course, I can go out and I could sit for 4 hours and I could find at least enough people to tell me that we should just eat dogs and then fuck them after or something. Like, okay, maybe not that. But we should eat dogs, which I agree with. I think it's fine to eat the dog. I don't care. Fuck you. I could make it seem like everybody in New York City thinks we should eat dogs. I would just go out there and talk to everybody like, hey, do you think we should eat a dog? And they'll be like, yeah, I do. Or no, I don't. And I would just take the ones that say, yeah, I think that it's fine to eat dogs. And I would get them, and I would take the ones with the most convincing arguments, and I would just put them in my video and go like, see, New York City thinks we should eat dogs. And that's something very similar to what Sneako does or has done in the past, just to be clear. And, you know, I still think that, like, there hasn't been a genuine moment necessarily. I don't know if there has been a genuine moment in Sneako's life when he was young and people perceived him as, like, this very intellectual young person, which might have been true. But I think a lot of it was him parroting somebody else. I mean, you look at his relationship where he was, like, parroting Andrew Tate very heavily for a very long time, or Fresh and Fit. I wonder how much of himself is himself, or how much of himself is, like, desperately trying to cling to somebody else or their perspective as, like, a grounding or a root. Because now it's Islam. You know, I don't know if there's necessarily a lot of independent thought, or if there's more of like, let me latch onto something. But I could be wrong.
And listen to more people than 99.9% of people. Obviously, you probably have done it extensively, but compared to how long I've been doing interviews and speaking to people, doing the Woman Podcast, I think that I have a sample rate of speaking to people that's more than most, by far.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about is when someone shares something that is contrary to your worldview, what does your mind do with it?
Probably immediately fight against it. Okay. Or no, not even just that, but also, no, I allow myself to see if it's true. I think about it.
Yeah, so that's also what's kind of confusing for me is like I think I can see you thinking about it, and part of the reason that I was interested in speaking with you is because I've seen a little bit of your stuff, and you actually seem to think about stuff. Like I don't get the sense that, I mean, I think you're quite inflammatory, but I don't think you're quite as rigid. You don't seem very rigid. You actually think about stuff. But what I would really encourage you to do is when someone says something that you think about, don't just critically analyze it. Try your hardest to understand how that could be true for this person.
Sure.
That's another idea that I just disagree with philosophically. I don't think that there's your truth or my truth as much as people like to give it. I think that there is one universal truth.
Sure, but what Dr. K is saying makes sense. But that's engaging in like true empathy. When somebody says a thing, engage with that and like, how do you see it from your perspective? I think that that's something that that's like true empathy to me. Again, it's easy to be able to empathize with people who are just like you, but when you're engaging with somebody who's not like you, that's true empathy.
So Winter became a member.
Hey, thank you so much for the membership. I appreciate that. Like, I'm going to use Daniel Larson as an argument because I think this is the best case, because we're talking about somebody who's not a particularly good person who engaged with a lot of problems. I think a lot of the times people that they engage with Daniel Larson, somebody who has autism, support needed autism and schizophrenia with horrible behavioral problems from living in like a neglectful, potentially abusive upbringing. What people are doing is they look at Daniel Larson and the scenario they're in, and they put themselves in there in a very shallow way where they say, I would never do this. I would never think that Grace VanderWaal is dating me, because obviously she's not. I would never let somebody convince me, or a group of people to convince me to leave my services, my group home services, to go and try to be homeless in California to become big. I would never let people make me seem like I could be a famous singer if my music isn't particularly good, which surprisingly some of it is actually good. I would never do this thing. But the thing is that, like, imagine you had so many massive roadblocks where you engage with the world with higher support needed autism, not like your friends that might have autism. Like, I know people with autism. There is a varying degree, right? So, for instance, look at Sweet Anita, right? Let's say a while ago she accidentally said the N-word. And people were like, well, that's understandable because she has Tourette's. And then I'd ask you, like, would it be okay if I started saying the N-word? And you say no. And I say, why not? I have Tourette's. Well, it's because my Tourette's doesn't manifest the same as hers. It's not as, it's not as intense. And so like your friend with autism is like me with Tourette's, whereas Daniel Larson's more like Sweet Anita with you know, Tourette's. You get my point. And so like you have to understand, like, okay, so there's a massive lacking of understanding when it comes to the autism. But then you factor in the schizophrenia, where there are aspects of Daniel's life where he just doesn't, he's delusional. I mean, that's the reality. And when it comes to a delusional person in a behavioral setting like this, or in like a group home setting, somebody with higher support needed, saying this isn't real does not work. Right? Like, hey, you're not really dating that person. No, he's convinced. And actually, when you confront somebody like Daniel Larson and say, you're not dating Grace Vanderwall, he gets erratic and angry. He gets irate. He gets violent because he knows in his head that it's true. He's dating her, but he's not. And then you interact with the behavioral aspect of it, where look at areas with bad kids that grow up in rough households.
Winter super chatted $6.56.
Thanks, brother.
First timer here.
Thank you.
Thanks for today's entertainment.
I appreciate that. But then you look at kids that don't have like any type of actual mental health problems, but they have behavioral problems, and then they grow up and they're, you know, not particularly good people. Maybe they steal more, or they get into more fights and they rob people because they haven't learned, you know, how to interact with society. And now you take individual upbringing problems with diagnosed issues and you put it all together, right? And that's how you get somebody who's not like the rest of us. And it's impossible for so many people to empathize with him and understand that like his relationship with doing inappropriate things is not the same as yours. If I was, you know, and I don't know, it's hard to know where it starts and ends with Daniel Larson liking pictures of young girls, because we know for a fact that people have hacked into his different accounts. And so it's hard to know if it actually is him or if somebody hacked into the account and then liked a bunch of stuff to make it seem like it's him. But it's like, if I was doing that as a 33-year-old man that's like very fully aware, fully capable, and fully understanding of the way that society works, if I was engaging in that behavior, I'm a fucking pedophile. There's no other way about it. But for Daniel Larson, somebody who was doing this apparently when he was like 19, there could be an infatuation with a particular color, with a weird smoothness of the skin. There actually might be an infatuation with wanting to have kids. That's a huge issue that people in the IDD community struggle with, is actually wanting to have kids and not being able to. There's 1,000 different things. It could be a color, a texture. It could be he might just not have a sexual attraction to it. It could be some kind of a different stimuli. You don't really know. And when we do is like we assign, and it doesn't make it appropriate, but when you try to look beyond the behavior to the source of the behavior, people struggle with that, right? People struggle with the ability to do that. And that's why, like, when I do occasionally talk about Daniel Larson, that's what I'm trying to communicate to people. I'm not trying to communicate that he's a good person. I'm not trying to communicate that. What I'm trying to communicate is that he is a victim of circumstances, and that like what happens when people engage in these troll networks is they're causing more harm to the people that he's harming, like Grace Vanderwall, like the people that he may assault, like the restaurant or fast food workers that he engages with. That's the point there, and that's like the true empathy conversation that I think that people are kind of missing out. Like, that's what I'm talking about, right? So that's an example of like true empathy that people aren't getting.
And that's what I've always been trying to get to, is what is the truth? Because everybody has this belief that there's my truth, and I think that's where people lead astray.
No, hold on. I don't think that, I'm not talking about my truth or your truth. I know it sounds weird because that's what I'm sort of asking you to do, but I'd actually say that, and it's kind of bizarre, but to get to the one truth, I think this is a really good way to do it.
Okay.
So it's not their truth or your truth. You don't know that your truth is closer to the truth than their truth. Mm-hmm. So if you really want to understand what the truth is, you have to try to approach it from all the different angles. It's like looking at, have you heard this tale of the blind man and the elephant?
No.
So like 4 blind people touch different parts of the elephant and they make conclusions about what it is.
I know a part I want to touch.
So one person is like, this is a cat because they touch its tail. One person is like, touches the trunk and I don't know what it is, fire hose, I don't know. One person touches the
big cock
foot and is like, this is a tree. One person touches an ear and it's like, this is a leaf. So one of the really interesting things is that, and I think you're quite insightful and you're quite a critical thinker, and it seems like you've accessed some dimension of spiritual knowledge, which is also quite potent. So I'm not trying to downplay anything that you've learned. And at the same time, knowing people as well as I know them, and maybe I don't know you, I think you will gain a lot if you really try to understand and set aside your own beliefs and really try to understand their perspective. Because I get the sense that you listen, but I do also get the sense that your mind is very automatic with like counter arguments. The thoughts pop up instantly. I think you're just going to get more. And it's not about, I'm not
Interesting. Like he's listening to respond instead of listening to absorb. Yeah, sure.
talking about woke, like, oh, everyone has their truth. Like, I think there's truth to that statement, but that's not what I'm alluding to. What I'm saying is simply that you're a flawed human being and everybody else is a flawed human being. And if you try to understand, really try to sit in someone else's shoes and understand their perspective, that you will have an enriched understanding of the world. And my experience has been the more people whose perspectives I understand, the closer I get to that common truth. Because it's the part that everyone agrees about that is the closest to the truth. That's a logical assumption, but that's been my experience. So just something to think about.
Do you ever go to therapy?
Do I ever go to therapy? I have done therapy for about 8 to 12 weeks in my life.
Interesting.
And last thing I want to ask you, like a lot of people in the chat are asking, how do they overcome porn addiction or masturbation addiction?
That's a good question.
It's a great question.
How do you overcome gooning?
A couple of things. One is we've got a bunch of resources about that. If people are interested, like I'll do like lectures and stuff on porn addiction. So we have stuff on that on YouTube, but I'll answer now in kind of a quick,
Okay, well, I'm curious.
quick way. So here's what we have to understand about porn addiction. Any addiction exists because of two things. When an activity gives us pleasure.
Well, my question too is that like not just how do you overcome porn addiction, how do you avoid engaging in a transfer addiction? Because I feel like that's really high. Like my understanding, I could be wrong, is that the rate of transfer addiction is very high. And like what's a better addiction to have? Does that make sense?
And takes away pain, we have the capacity to become addicted to it. If you really look at things, when an activity gives us pleasure and takes away pain, we have the capacity to become addicted to it.
Okay.
If you really look at addiction, there's a cycle of addiction. So in the first phase of addiction, all it does is make us feel good.
Okay.
In the second phase of addiction, so let's say like something like smoking or coffee or playing a video game. The first game that you play is fun. The first time you jerk off and you watch porn, it's fantastic, right? There's no downside.
Sure.
Then what happens over time is we develop a tolerance to the positive. So the first cup of coffee that I drink in my life will keep me awake for 24 hours. But if I drink it every way, I develop a tolerance. This is a neuroscientific mechanism. This is also part of the reason that many people start to watch more hardcore or extreme pornography over time. Because they get desensitized or develop a tolerance. So the second phase of addiction is sort of you stop enjoying it. And then the other thing that starts to happen is it suppresses our negative emotional experience. And if you really work with people who are addicted to pornography, what you'll find is that they're not actually very lustful. They use it as an emotional regulation technique. When they feel bored, when they feel sad, when they're trying to keep negative thoughts at bay, oftentimes we're not even aware of it because men are alexithymic.
Yeah, that's when I jerk off. Holy fuck, this is actually upsetting me listening to this. Okay.
Which means that we are
That's why I have to listen to it.
Colorblind to our internal emotional state. We're so good at ignoring and shoving down our emotions, we're not even aware when we feel them. So a lot of that porn behavior is actually driven by negative emotions. So the real way to break free of porn addiction is, first of all, you have to do something with, so porn serves a purpose. That's why we get addicted to stuff. We will ruin our lives for an addiction not because the addiction is bad, because it's really good. So a good example of this is I had a patient who was addicted to heroin, getting fired from their job, going through a divorce, on the brink of financial ruin. Kids don't talk to them. And then I was like, bro, don't you just, like, I don't understand how you don't get this. Like, heroin is fucking ruining every dimension of your life. Why don't you just stop? And then he turned to me and he was like, well, it's because that every part of my life is falling apart that I can't stop. Heroin is the only time that my life is put together.
That's like a consistent aspect of your life. Damn. Is that what porn is for me? Okay.
The rest of when I'm not high, like, everything's falling apart. So for most people who are addicted, there's this neuroscientific component, but there's also something underlying that is driving the addiction. So you have to fix that. So whatever insecurity it is, however you manage your emotions, you can metabolize your emotions, you can hit the gym, you can go pray, you can go see a therapist. Those are all very effective. And I think like everything all together is ideal, unless something doesn't work for you, which is totally fair. And so you have to fix what's driving the underlying addiction. And if you look at the science of porn addiction, the number one thing that correlates with having a pornography addiction is a sense of meaninglessness in life.
Interesting. I wonder if I have that anymore, because I don't think I have a sense of meaninglessness in my life. I think I used to, like when I first started fucking, because I used to like all jokes. I used to like goon like hard edge fucking bad. Like there's a day where I think I spent like almost like 12 to 16 hours just edging and jacking off all day, laying in bed. And there was a time in my life where I felt very meaningless. I was in like a dead end job and I was just like there. And I wonder if my addiction just kind of transferred to now. You know, I wonder if that's what it is, and I'm still dealing with it. But if that's the case, then what the fuck? You know, like how do I overcome it if I don't have that problem anymore? This problem of meaninglessness in my life. Then again, sometimes I'm not really so much anymore. I feel pretty good about the content I make. There are some times where I haven't, where I felt like it was a little too like bullshit drama-y, and sometimes it is. But now I think I'm pretty good. Like I'm enjoying this. Like I feel like this is decent to engage in. It's like intellectual to some extent. And I like some of it. So I don't think I have like a meaninglessness problem in my life. Maybe I need a kid. I want a kid. Maybe that's the meaning I'm searching for. I don't know. I wonder what it is. Why are you guys freaking out? Because I said I jerked off for like 18 hours once. Like, who gives a shit? I'm like, okay. I don't know. I'm soul searching. I'm soul searching in life. I'm testing my boundaries. I'm being vulnerable, guys. I'm scared. No. I find it interesting because I think I do have some kind of a porn or sex addiction. I think it's mostly a porn addiction. That said, like, I think that's why I was open and poly for so long, as almost a way to cope with it to some extent, you know. And maybe I first started because of like a lack of attention. Like female attention. Like I used to not be super, you know, my more historically obsession with women started in like my very early 20s, late teens, early 20s, because I couldn't, well, maybe even as a teenager, because I couldn't really get girls. And then like I got to a point where I could, and then I just started fucking so many girls and just fucking around. And like I never wanted to be in a regular relationship after that moment. And so I wonder if maybe that was like the aspect of like the meaninglessness, almost like maybe there's an insecurity in that for me of feeling attractive. Does that make any sense? This is interesting. I don't know. It's so weird because I'm in like a weird state right now where like I think you call it dissociating. Like I don't even exist right now. Like I'm thinking about myself as if I'm a different person. You know, like my 20-year-old self is not me right now. It's so interesting. Something to think about. Yeah, interesting stuff. I wonder.
So finding purpose is a very
Papa Gut overcomes his gooning addiction.
very powerful antidote to porn addiction. And the simple way to
Sorry, I gotta listen to that.
sense of meaninglessness in life. So finding purpose is a very powerful antidote to porn addiction. And the simple way to understand that is you have to have a reason to stop watching porn. You gotta be doing something with your life. Otherwise, like if you're fucking sitting at home all day, like why the fuck not, right? Your brain is sitting there and it's like, we've been sitting here for 6 hours, we haven't been doing anything, let me watch some porn.
Yeah, true. And that might be part of the problem too, because I have like my work allows me to look at porn so much.
And so you got to fix whatever it is. You got to start to get some purpose,
I think I
do
need
some
more
emotional metabolism,
self-control.
which is the ultimate fuel for the porn addiction. And then there's also a behavioral component of like, you know, reducing your consumption, limiting your consumption, making it so when you have an impulse to watch porn, it isn't so easy. So if you sort of have an impulse to engage in an addictive behavior, if you can create time between the impulse and the access, that will help a lot. And if you really think about it, people who develop technology understand this. So it used to be that I had to unlock my phone and then open an app in order to like look at cat pictures. But phone developers are getting better and better.
Pussy pics or?
Better at Face ID, thumbprint. And so now it's easy anytime we have an impulse to access it. And the more time that we delay, the more that our impulse can disappear. Or we can start to think, or we can think, okay, I don't have time for this. But like people are getting really, really good at like, I have an impulse, let me gratify it right this second. So you have to work on that too, which is like really limiting how easy it is to access porn. So this is very simple stuff. Like if you've got a Pornhub account, delete it. A log out of whatever, you know, stuff that you have so it's not easy to access. Or delete it all so it's hard to find or whatever. Like you can do all that kind of stuff and it'll help. But I think that usually working with addictions, you got to fix that underlying stuff. And the good news is that the addiction oftentimes melts away on its own.
Yeah, I gotta start streaming more. I might be right. I'll start streaming more. I'll have to get an editor and I'll make a gaming channel. How would you guys like that? How about that? Interesting.
If you do the rest of the work.
You gotta do the work.
You have to do the work. Absolutely, man. I think
If I did that, it wouldn't be until I was downstairs in like more of an office space. Maybe I should motivate myself to get my house together and get downstairs and like actually consider doing that.
the last thing that I'll share is that in my experience, therapy is a lot of work. It's not like a, I mean, it's heavy, dude. It's like lifting, just lifting your emotions and lifting your thoughts, and you know, there's heavy shit down there.
It's definitely easier than sparring. Sitting and
Okay.
talking about your childhood. Yeah,
It's interesting. It's interesting. I think this is one of those moments where like Sneako can have the thought and just consider it. It's a different type of difficulty. It's interesting. Okay, but whatever.
talking about your childhood is easier than
I don't know if I
physical
agree with that,
exhaustion.
man. No, I mean, I think some people are much more comfortable with their body than they are with their emotions, especially men. Like talking about emotions is very hard for men. Vulnerability is very hard for men.
Nothing wrong with gaming channels. I'm just not good at playing video games anymore. Like, not that I don't care if I'm bad at them. I don't give a shit. But like, I'm not good at motivating myself to play video games. And like, I have no desire to like make the content in a way that's consumable. So for the content I do right now, very consumable from what I like. I like react and engage with stuff, and then I'll talk about it. I feel like this is consumable, and I like the way I put content out. I wouldn't really want to find an editor and do something a little more long or compressed, because I like it. I like this more casual. You know, let's say I watched this and then I made like a 1 hour video about some of the talking points. I feel like that's too meaningful in a way that doesn't encourage a conversation. I don't know if this makes sense to you guys. It might just be the way my brain processes. But anyway, that's irrelevant. For a gaming channel, it's like, well, what would I do? Like, am I just gonna? Like, I don't know how I would do it. Excuse me. So yeah, I'd have to consider that.
Because there's ego involved. Like surrendering your ego is really hard. Like I'm not saying that sparring is easy, but I think there's plenty of people who love sparring. Like plenty of people, it's not hard. They live for it.
Sure.
And you know, so I don't agree with the generalization of your statement, but I completely agree that for some people, for me, sparring is harder than talking about my emotions, for sure. So in a sense,
I guess for Sneako, sparring is easier than talking about his emotions.
Proving your point. I think people are different. Does that answer the porn addiction question?
It does. It does.
Any other thoughts or questions before we wrap up for the day?
Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. This is a good conversation. I need to like listen to. Yeah.
Yeah, your energy has changed over the course of the conversation. I appreciate everything that you put into it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you. I can see that you actually appreciate your attention and focus on this.
Yeah. Take care, man. Good luck.
All right. I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, man. Take care.
Inshallah. All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Interesting. All right, that was a simulating conversation. I'll say that.